Good evening, everybody. We're going to get started, so if you could take a seat. And if you could sign in, that would be great. We have a little yellow pad out outside the door. If you didn't get to sign in, maybe you can sign out on your way out. Thank you. I'm Sarah Shepard, and I'm with DEC's Region 3 office in New Paltz. And I'm just going to start explaining how things are going to go tonight. And I'm really glad to see a good turnout. That's wonderful. So tonight's meeting is to discuss the proposed remedy for the former marble quarry landfill. And we're going to start with a presentation from staff from DEC and from the Department of Health. And that's going to run maybe a little bit longer than is typical because we have, there's a lot of concerns, there are a lot of issues, and we just want to make sure everything is addressed. Our presentation, I know we're getting to be a standing room only situation here, and for anybody who can't fit in, our presentation is being broadcast live on the public access TV in town, and also we are recording it, and you will be able to watch it again on the Village of, from a link on the Village of Tuckahoe website. Yeah, there are seats up front. I see like at least 4 over on this side, and there's a few over here, so if anybody would like to take a seat, please come to the front. There's one right in front here on the left and the right. After the presentation, which is probably going to go around 45 minutes, we're going to be taking your questions, and I'm going to be passing the microphone, that one over there, around so you can be heard. The room is small, but this is for people I know who are watching on TV. So, and I'm asking everybody just to state your name and where you're from or your affiliation as appropriate. I'd like to also, give everybody a chance to ask their questions and be heard. So please try not to go on for too long. But we'll see what we can cover. And our comment period on this cleanup is still going on, and you can email or mail comments in to our project manager, Randy Witcher, through April 24th. And so comments that you make tonight are not a part of the official record. We need them in email or in writing. So I just want you to be clear about that. I'd like to introduce the DEC and DOH staff that are here. Our project manager behind me, Randy Witcher, and then he's going to be doing the bulk of the presentation tonight, and then the new project manager for the site once the remedy is selected will be Kevin Carpenter. He's over there in the corner. Also with us tonight from the Division of Remediation is George Heitzman, right here, and George is our Director of Brownfield and Superfund Programs for the Hudson Valley. And we also have over here Amen Omarogbe. He's a section chief also with remediation. And from Department of Health, we have 2 people from the Bureau of Environmental Exposure Investigation, Renata Ackerby and Steve Karpinski, public health specialist. And I think we're ready. Oh yes, very important. Bathroom is downstairs. And I think I'll turn things over to Randy. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So we've got quite a few slides to get through, so we'll get right to it. This is an image of the Marble Quarry site looking northwest. You can see the Denning building off here to the north. And as you can see, the site is fenced. There's some cover here, grass, and a little bit of paved area. So the overview for the meeting is going to be site background and history, remedial investigation results, DEC and DOH actions, an off-site investigation, exposure assessment, and the proposed remedial action. So this image shows the area of the BCP site, which is outlined in green here. I'm going over. And then we also have the former waste pits here, the quarry, which are outlined in red. And there's also an open pit here, which is filled with water. So that can just get you guys familiar with where the areas are we're going to be talking about. So the site location is obviously located in the village of Tuckahoe. It's a vacant 3.5 acre lot made up of 2 tax parcels. Residential area, Verde Avenue is to the west. I can show that to you real quick, right over here. There's commercial properties to the north, which I'll go back and show you, right up here. And then commercial properties also to the east, and a large parking area to the south. I'll show you those. So we've got commercial areas over here, and then the parking areas in the south. And the site is currently zoned commercial. So site history: Marble Quarry operated for approximately 100 years and ceased operation in 1930. It was vacant from 1930 to about the early 50s, where it was left as open pits. And we have some aerial photos that show where water was collecting inside those pits at that time. During the early 50s to the 70s, the site was used as a mixed industrial waste dump. Wastes inside the dump included ash, C&D, which is construction debris, or demolition, excuse me, debris, automotive, and also industrial waste from Tuckahoe Ice, most likely, Burroughs Welcome, most likely also U.S. Vitamins, Lee Oil and Chemicals, and a few others. And from 1970 to 1990, the site was used for auto repair and auto storage. So site geology and hydrology, 0 to 6 feet, there's a sand fill material. Below the sand from 3 to 150 feet approximately, there's a marble unit comprised of dolomite marble, and that's what was mined out of the site. This map over here kind of gives you an overview of where the marble areas were within Westchester County and moving down into the New York City area. The 2 marble pits found on site were mined to a depth of approximately 100 feet below ground surface. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the 2 pits were filled with mixed industrial wastes and comprised most of the BCP site. So the 2 pits are separated by a marble rise near the middle of the site, and the portions of pits' sidewalls are also found within the site boundaries. Fractured bedrock below the marble layer is also found in some other areas off-site, and the site is surrounded by shallow bedrock outcroppings. Obviously, off to the west, there's a large cliff there about 30 to 35 feet where Verde Avenue is. The pits act as pools, and they collect rainwater and runoff water. Groundwater pools release to bedrock and flows down gradient towards the south-southwest. Regional groundwater flow in the area we know to be south-southwest towards the Bronx River. So here's a cross-section for you guys to look at. This is south-southwest heading north. And I can show you where this cross-section approximately lies in this direction. So as you can see here, we have the main pit that's on site, the marble rise that I talked about, and then also a portion of the northernmost pit. So groundwater flow direction is on this map, and as you can see by the arrow, it's heading south-southwest. So there's this image we put up here we wanted to talk about. I think a lot of people have seen this. It's showing a large conduit or a karst that's picking up contaminants possibly from the quarry pits and heading down towards the Bronx River, and a spring called Remedial Springs. Just want to mention that this scale is over 4.6 miles, and there's several data points here: the sinkhole in Scarsdale, the pits obviously, and then the Bronx River and Remedial Springs. So to the south of the site, we found in our records there was an old volunteer site where they had a lot of soil borings and wells put in. It's about 500 feet from the BCP site, and they did several borings and wells that they put in. There was also a production well on site, and there was also some wells over in a parking area right here. What we found was they had a very deep production well, and I'm showing you here on this slide, that ran down 550 feet below grade. What they didn't see in this well was any marble. And the fractures that they found were very deep, that were bearing water, about 420 feet below the grade level. So I've got it in negative here, so it's below sea level. And then another decent fracture at 423, which is also way below the total depth of the pits. No significant groundwater fractures were found within the band from approximately 420 up to surface. So they drilled this well for their production water to use in their processes, and they couldn't find any decent source. So they had to keep going deeper. So that kind of eliminates the karst theory that there's a large conduit bringing contamination down to the Bronx River. We're not saying that there's not karst in the area. However, this model doesn't really represent what we feel exists. In addition, the marble that's shown on this slide here probably isn't continuous. We know that they mine certain areas. If it was continuous throughout the whole region, they would have mined everything up. So the remedial investigation was conducted by the volunteer of the site who entered into the BCP program. They did 13 soil borings and collected and analyzed 25 subsurface soil samples. The collection, they collected and analyzed 10 surface soil samples, installed 6 groundwater wells, and they took samples from 9 groundwater wells. There was 3 that were already existing on site. And they also installed and sampled 18 soil vapor probes. Excuse me. This is just a quick map to show you where everything is in relation to the site here. So the red dots, which I'm hovering over, were the groundwater wells. There's some blue dots, which were some of the vapor probe points. And the green areas were soil probes. And along this area here, you can't really tell the difference, but there's also a lighter green dot that shows soil vapor points. So the soil results that we have, they're compared to the commercial cleanup standard, commercial soil cleanup objective, which we call SCOs for short. There's several different SCOs that New York State has, unrestricted, and that would be for use like if you're going to be raising livestock or growing vegetables. We also have restricted residential, which is also used. That's used for homes, but it's restricted, so we wouldn't allow planting or usually the use of groundwater at a site that had restricted residential remediation. Commercial, which we have here, industrial, and there's also a few others, protection of groundwater and ecological standard SCOs. And the soil results are reported in parts per million. I know that's kind of a tough thing to visualize, $1 and 1 million, but I have a scale of a few things that might help you figure out how large or how small of a number this is. So the 1 part per million would be 1 inch in 16 miles, 1 second in 11.5 days, or 1 minute in 2 years, just to give you a reference of 1 part per million, excuse me. So this is a chart that shows the volatile organic compounds, which we abbreviate to VOC, and these are the compounds that off-gas, and compared to the restricted commercial soil cleanup objectives, we had no exceedances in all 39 of the detections that we found on site. Semi-volatile compounds, SVOCs, found in soil. We had 4 that we found to exceed, and the number of exceedances are off here to the right that I'm highlighting, and several detections. These are most likely associated with the ash material, any burning that was done on site. You'd most commonly find these for benzo group and the dibenzo anthracenes in diesel exhaust. If you burnt one of your hot dogs at home, there's a portion of that would be one of these compounds. And I've generated a graph here to show you the standard, which was 5.6 associated with all the samples that were taken on site. So we had 1 that met at 5.6, and then a few that were over, but just slightly. This is for benzopyrene, another chart to show you all the samples that were taken for benzoapyrene in soil standard, which is 1 part per million, and we have several that exceed here, but no more than 6 times the limit. Another one here, benzo-B-fluoranthene in soils, same standard, 1, and here's all the soil samples, the result obviously in blue, and no more than 8 times the standard here. This is the last one that I highlighted. It's dibenz AH anthracene in soil. It's got a lower standard of 0.56 ppm, and we had 5 exceedances, or no, excuse me, 6. and a lot of non-detects throughout the 39 soil samples that were taken on site. So this is a chart that shows PCBs in soil, and I've got highlighted here the cleanup objective here, which is 1, and the concentrations that we saw, number of detections in 38 samples, and the number of exceedances. We exceeded each of these once out of 38, but just a marginal exceedance. As you can see by the graph here, the PCB Alachlor 1260 is in orange, and the other PCB 1245 is in blue. We exceeded once for the orange compound by about 10%, and then 30% by PCB 1245. And as you can see, a lot of the samples were non-detect. They didn't find it. So this chart shows metals in soil. Sorry I didn't make any highlights here, but there were a few that we found exceed the commercial standard in soil. Arsenic we were found to exceed 3 times out of 39 samples. Barium 3 times out of 39 samples. Copper twice out of 39 samples, and that's it. Everything else met the standard. We have an exceedance here that's about 4 times, a little over 4 times the standard, and here less than half on arsenic and barium, and then copper about 3 times the standard. So now I'm going to go over to the groundwater results that were found on site. So the groundwater results are compared to ambient groundwater standards. Groundwater levels are reported in parts per billion, and this is another tough term, in 1 part per billion, and I can give you a couple examples of what that means. So it'd be 1 sheet of toilet paper in a roll stretching from New York to London. It's kind of tough to imagine. 1 second in about 32 years. This is an important concept we want to go over real quick because it'll help explain some of our thinking on some of the groundwater samples. So turbidity in groundwater is anytime you have suspended particles in the groundwater that make it hazy or clouded. And the definition is cloudiness or haziness of a fluid caused by large amounts of suspended particles. So the DEC has a protocol in which when we do our groundwater sampling, we seek to get the samples free of turbidity or to a certain range because we don't want to sample the suspended particles. We want to see what's dissolved inside the water because that's actually what's in the water that can move. Samples with high turbidity readings can alter the results of groundwater as the particles are also included in the groundwater. So if you think of putting soil into a glass of water, you're getting soil and water in it. Sure, sorry. I'll put the mic closer to my face here. No problem. So this is just an image to give you an idea. These are the measurement units that are associated with turbidity. They're called NTUs. We seek to get samples around 50. So as you can see, 25 here looks like bottled water. 2,000 looks like a muddy stream or creek. The samples that we pulled out of the site in some wells were probably the 3,000 to 2,500 range. So there was a lot of suspended particles inside the groundwater. So I'm just going to go over the VOCs, the volatile organic compounds we found in water. The major hitters here that we found were benzene. We found it 3 times that it exceeded at every sample, but out of 20. Some of the more notable PCE we found at 1900 and exceeded 4 samples out of 20, but it was in 1 well, monitoring well 8, and I can show you where that location is later. And TCE, which exceeded 3 times, and the maximum range there was 110. The standard was 5 and 5 for each. Oh, yep. So PCE stands for tetrachloroethylene, and TCE stands for trichloroethylene. These are degreasers or solvents. PCE was used in dry cleaning, so, and TCE was kind of usually used as a vapor degreaser. PCE, I think, was also used in parts washers near or in automotive industry too. SVOCs in groundwater. So this is semi-volatile organic compounds in groundwater. So the same players that we found in soils also showed up in groundwater. So we had benzoanthracene, benzoapyrene, benzo-B-fluoranthanine, and benzo-K-fluoranthanine, and indeno 123, can't read that, CD-pyrene. And we exceeded several times here, but as I mentioned, that's associated, most likely associated with the ash components of the landfill. And turbid samples as well. We didn't, I'll get into that a little bit later and flip back to show you. So we also found some pesticides in groundwater. We found small hits around the site for certain chemicals. The two notables, 4,4-DDT and 4,4-DDE. These are obviously breakdown products of the one everybody's familiar with, DDT. And we didn't exceed any for the groundwater standards for DDD, but we did exceed for DDE, excuse me. And I generated a few charts for you to look at. So here's the chart for DDD, standards 0.3 parts per billion. And we had 4 hits, but all were below the standard. And here's the DDE slide. Standard is 0.2 parts per billion, and we exceeded 3 out of 20. This is a PCBs in groundwater. So we exceeded PCBs at 3 for Alachlor 1260, just a type of PCB. 3 out of 20, and that was about 5 times the standard. And then PCB or Alachlor 1254, which also exceeded 5 times the standard, 2 out of 20 samples. This is metals found in groundwater. So when we did the metals analysis, we realized that turbidity would be a big issue because the soil particles the metals would bond to the soil particles. So we did 2 types of sampling. We took samples filled with the turbidity or the suspended particles, and we also did field filtering where we passed it through a micron filter to see what was actually dissolved, if the metals had dissolved into the water so they may move off site. And when we passed them through the micron filter, we found barium exceeded once, iron, manganese, and sodium. But the sodium, manganese, and iron are pretty well associated with any type of landfill we usually find them in. And I generated some graphs to show you some of the items here. Antimony has a standard of 3 ppb. The blue is unfiltered, so these would be the turbid samples that were taken, but as I stated, we took filtered samples, and as you can see here, no orange shows up. It's also worth mentioning that monitoring well 8 and 9 both cleared up. So when we did our sampling, the water was able to be taken as is. We didn't have much turbidity in it. And we took duplicates of both of those wells. We also, just as a check, filtered the non-turbid water in duplicate 8 just to check ourselves. And they didn't show up for antimony. Much the same for arsenic, standard of 25 ppb. So the blues are your turbid samples, and we had a few hits in those turbid samples, 1 outside for a filtered, but nothing over the standard for the filtered samples. Barium in groundwater, we had 1 exceedance for a filtered samples. As you can see, the blues are the unfiltered, the turbid samples, and our non-turbid sample, which was filtered, had a pretty consistent reading, both regular and filtered, to show that they correlate well. So the filtered and the non-filtered showed the same result. Standard here was 1,000 parts per billion. This is cadmium in groundwater. Same issue here. We didn't see anything for filtered. Unfiltered, the unfiltered samples did show hits. This one, chromium in groundwater. Just want to point your attention over to the side here for the scale. It's logarithmic, so I could show you the concentrations we were finding. So everything's multiplied by 10 going up the scale. So as you can see here, we're right around 1,000 for some of these chromium non-filtered samples, the samples with the turbidity or the suspended particles. Monitoring well 6 and our clean or non-turbid sample in the duplicate 8 for monitoring well 8 showed a pretty reasonable association between the filtered and non-filtered there. So none of the filtered exceeded standards. Copper and groundwater, same situation. The turbid samples did show hits, detections above the standard of 200 ppb. Our monitoring well 8 dupe showed a duplicate showed a hit of for the non-filtered and also a hit for the filtered, but it was low turbidity, still below the standard. I think this is the one that got everybody scared. This is lead. Same issue over here on the scale, so we're multiplying by 10 every time you go up a scale, or up on the scale. So we have one hit here, I think it was 3,500, which is way above the standard of 25. However, when we filtered that sample, it was below 10. So these samples, 8, duplicate 8, 9, duplicate 9, all below the standards, and our duplicate that was filtered shows a correlated result with the non-filtered sample.
You say a filtered sample?
Mm-hmm.
Would that be, for argument's sake, if there was well water and somebody filtered the water that you say is bad, and it would then come up good under the particle level?
It's a reasonable assumption to make. In the landfill waste, when you're pulling water out, it's very loose. A lot of particles get in the groundwater, so it's very tough to get it out. The water that passes through the site doesn't carry the particles with it. It's just the water. So we're looking for the dissolved phase that's in it. If you had a well at home, you would run that, and you'd probably get turbidity in your well, or if you surged it or something like that, the power went out. Over time, it can clear up because you're in like a consolidated material. You're not in, landfill waste. So that water could also be turbid, and some people have metals in solution in their water, which they try to filter out with an iron system or a.
Or you were referring to the sample, the filtered sample.
Right.
You were then taking the raw sample, filtering it how? The way somebody would filter their own well water?
Not in the same way, no.
Let's get to questions later.
Yeah,
Okay.
we should hold our questions, please.
We'll get back to you.
But most importantly, it's an indication of what can migrate from the site. Really, only the orange samples have the potential to migrate from the site.
Correct. Everything else is you have soil and water in it. And another one here, mercury in groundwater. We didn't see it at all. No filtered samples came up with mercury in it. However, the turbid samples did show detections above the standard. Nickel in groundwater, same issue. Turbid samples did show up, filtered did not. A few ticks there. So we also took, or we didn't take, the volunteer took soil vapor results from the site, and these were reported in micrograms per cubic meter. And here's the significant soil vapor results we saw on site. So Freon 114, Freon 11, and Freon 12 were very high. We had a large span of results here for those 3 compounds. We also saw PC, which is tetrachloroethylene, and TC, trichloroethylene, at high results as well, but only in one vapor point near the high well, which I mentioned earlier. We found breakdown products of these 2 compounds as well, which would be cis-2,1 dichloroethylene and vinyl chloride. And then the other 2 compounds, 1,1,1 trichloroethylene, carbon tetrachloride, and methylene chloride. So this is a spider chart just to kind of give you an idea where we found these results. So as you can see, the significant results were right near the site border. This is the PCE, TCE, which I mentioned earlier, which is right near the well where we found the high results of those 2 compounds earlier. And oddly enough, a lot of these samples are outside of the waste pits. So we're still trying to make a determination of where these compounds are coming from. I think that's it. I think George wanted to talk a little bit about DEC and DOH actions.
So as Sarah said, my name is George Heitzman, and I'm the director for brownfield and hazardous waste remediation programs in the Hudson Valley out of the Albany office. You bet, sorry. Before I get into the state's actions, I want to sort of recap what Randy hit on. And Randy went into a lot of detail because there's some misinformation out there from some previous meetings. Number one, this idea of a conduit that goes through the landfill and somehow discharges to the Bronx River near the school. Well, when you look at the boring at the neighboring site, they went down well below the level of the landfill before they hit any significant fractures. Is at least 100 feet below, right? Okay, so this idea that's been put out in some of the graphics that there's this conduit that leads to the school does not appear to be justified when you look at additional data from neighboring sites, okay? We are going to further investigate that, and I'll talk a little bit more about what our plans are to further investigate, but it appears, based on the data we have, that that conduit does not exist, okay? The second thing is with respect to soil numbers, some of the previous presentations have used the improper standards for comparing the soil results. They compared to unrestricted soil numbers as opposed to the commercial numbers that are applicable to this site. They used things for farming, for ecological resources that accumulate in fish and wildlife. Well, those resources don't exist here, and so that was not the proper comparison. And Randy showed a more appropriate comparison to the proper standards. And then with respect to groundwater, he showed that when you look at the filtered samples that represent the dissolved contamination that could migrate from the site, in most cases, it meets the standards. And it's only the very cloudy, turbid samples in that picture he showed that was very sort of muddy. When you only look at that is when you get these exceedances of standards. Okay. No one's arguing that there was waste placed in this landfill. It was an ash fill. It accepted industrial waste. There's no question about that. We don't debate that. The question is, how bad is the site? And what is the appropriate thing to do with the site? And we'll get to that. So, however, with respect to vapor, the state determined that, yeah, there is a significant problem here with respect to those very high levels of freon and chlorinated solvents that are present at the site. So we made what's called a significant threat determination. We said that the data the volunteer collected indicates that there is a potential for vapor exposures in the surrounding buildings, and because the volunteer is not responsible for looking off-site, the state will spend state Superfund money to do the investigations in the off-site buildings. And we have done that. Randy went out, how long ago? In December, took samples from 2 of the buildings. Well, the winter is when we want to take the samples because that's when everyone's windows are closed. That's when people's heating systems are on.
The groundwater samples were taken.
No, I'm sorry, the vapor samples.
Vapor samples were taken
In March, okay. That data is not back yet. We expect it back, I think by the end of May, we should get those results back from the lab. Okay, so DEC, because of this significant threat determination, has begun to look at what are the off-site impacts associated with this. And the way we do that is we start sort of in the bullseye where we found the highest vapor samples on site, and we will work our way out until we find acceptable levels of vapor, or preferably non-detectable levels of vapor. Okay, and we've already taken the first steps towards that. The other implication of the significant threat determination is this very meeting tonight. We are not required to hold public meetings for brownfield sites. However, once we make that significant threat determination, it requires that there be a public meeting and that we consider public input on the remedy for the site. And that's why we're here tonight. So it also means that the volunteer does not select the final remedy for the site. It is the New York State DEC that selects the final remedy upon consideration of public input. And that's why any comments you have on the proposed remedy, it's important that you send them to Randy by the 24th, either by mail or by email, and that gets entered into the record. Okay? And as I said, we're using state Superfund money to investigate what could be migrating from the site. So the second action that we took, and this is a separate action, is when it came to our attention just what was in this part of the quarry, knowing that there are other areas of the quarry that have not been investigated, we designated the other two lobes of the quarry, if you will, as a potential inactive hazardous waste disposal site. And hopefully you can see the graphic. Oh, it's the next one, yeah. So that's these areas. The green is the brownfield site that we're talking about the remedy for tonight. And then the areas to the north and south, no, it doesn't show it on this figure, does it? Okay. The areas to the north and south, which represent about another 3 acres, we have designated as a P site. And we have to do 2 things now. We have to pursue the responsible parties who were responsible for disposing of the waste in those landfills and pursue enforcement actions against them to have them step up and do the investigation and any remediation that's required for those landfills. If they're not viable, and a lot of these companies are out of business, or if they decline, then we can use state Superfund money to step in and do that investigation ourselves. Okay? The message here, though, is that's not going to be a quick process. We have to pursue legal actions. That could take a while before we are allowed to spend Superfund money. Okay? We have an obligation to spend taxpayers' money wisely, believe it or not. And so we will go after the private parties to spend the money first. Okay? But that process has also begun. Okay, and now Randy's going to go back to the offsite vapor.
So the slide that you just saw previously is the offsite investigation that we did in March. So 2 buildings were investigated: the Broken Bow Brewery. Sure, I'm sorry. How's that? I'll start over. So 2 buildings were investigated during the off-site soil vapor investigation. The first one was the Broken Bow Brewery building just east of the site. You can see that highlighted in red. The second building was Kai Martial Arts building, which is dead center of the site, more or less, off to the east. And this point here is an ambient air sample, which we take outdoors whenever we do any sampling. So the slide that George was referring to about the off-site investigation is right here. As you can see, the parcels to the north here will be included in the off-site potential investigation. And the southern parcel here, that includes 40, 117, and 225 Marbledale Road. The remainder of the quarry pits, these are the remainder of the quarry pits, the lobes that George was talking about, outside of the BCP site, and the site's roughly 3.1 acres. And Renata's going to come up and talk a little bit about exposure assessment. Sure. I've got some cards I can pass around, and we'll put it up on a slide at the end. How's that sound? Sure. It's Randy, R-A-N-D-Y, Whitcher, W-H-I-T-C-H-E-R, at dec.ny.gov. You're welcome.
Good evening, everybody. How's the volume?
Pull it down.
Not good? How's that? Okay. My name is Renata Ackerby, as was mentioned previously. I work for the New York State Department of Health, thank you, in Albany, New York. I'd like to take a few moments this evening and talk about how the DOH and the DEC work together in providing oversight at brownfield sites to make sure the public is not exposed to hazardous wastes. Now, what specifically is exposure? Exposure is the physical contact between a person and a chemical. This can happen through ingestion, inhalation, or via direct contact or touching. And one or more of these physical contacts must occur before a chemical has the potential to cause an adverse health effect. In addition, exposure to a chemical does not necessarily mean that an adverse health effect. I'm sorry? Oh.
We need to get her slides up. There we go.
There we go.
Okay. Sorry, I'm an analog girl, so I apologize. So anyway, one or more of these physical contacts must occur before a chemical has the potential to cause an adverse health effect. And exposure does not necessarily mean that an adverse health effect will occur. At the former Marble Quarry site, we looked at 3 potential exposure pathways. Are people drinking contaminated groundwater? Are people breathing in indoor air impacted by soil vapor intrusion? And are people touching contaminated soils? The first potential exposure pathway I'd like to assess and discuss is ingestion. The area is served by public water that is routinely tested to make sure that it meets drinking water standards. People are not drinking water contaminated by the site. The second potential exposure pathway I'd like to discuss is inhalation. And before we get to that assessment, I'd like to take a moment and talk about soil vapor and the process we refer to as soil vapor intrusion. Soil vapor consists of the air particles in between soils underground. Soil vapor intrusion is a process by which volatile organic chemicals from underground contaminated groundwater, soils, or other sources volatilizes into the soil vapor. This contaminated soil vapor then can migrate upward and enter overlying structures, affecting the indoor air quality. Some of the ways that soil vapor can enter a structure can be through cracks in the foundation, a basement sump, a dirt floor, or through other openings in a building foundation. At the site, there are currently no buildings. Inhalation of site-related contaminants via soil vapor intrusion is not a current concern. The potential for indoor air impacts via soil vapor intrusion in proposed new on-site buildings will be addressed by the use of vapor barriers and the operation of active subslab depressurization systems. In addition, the potential for soil vapor intrusion is being evaluated in off-site structures. The third and final potential exposure pathway that we evaluated was direct contact. Access to the site is limited, however, trespassers could potentially contact site contaminants. During and after site development, measures will be in place to prevent contact with residual soil contamination. So based on our evaluation of the environmental site information, remedial actions, and the potential exposure pathways, the proposed remedy will be protective of human health.
Thank you, Renata. So now we'd like to go over the draft remedial action work plan to let you guys know what's in the remedy itself. So the first point in the draft remedial action work plan is excavation and off-site disposal of contaminated target areas. So what's going to happen is these areas will be excavated, and after they're excavated, that soil will be taken off-site and disposed of. The excavation will then be sampled. The bottom point of each excavation will be sampled and the sidewalls to ensure that the standards are met. If they are not met, excavation must continue, and those soils must be removed from the site. Those areas and many areas across the site will be backfilled with clean soils, and as they're regrading the site, making the site level again for the proposed development, they'll remove anything that's grossly contaminated if they find it. So obviously we don't have borings all over the site, completely covering the entire site. So there is a chance that they may run into some material that needs to be removed out. That'll be screened and taken off-site for disposal. Next point is the site cover. So the entire site will be covered with either 1 foot of clean soil that meets the commercial soil cleanup objective, or 6 inches of concrete or asphalt. To combat the vapor issues, we'll have vapor mitigation systems that Renata spoke about. So any on-site building will have a sub-slab depressurization system, which is kind of like a radon system. And continued operation and maintenance of this system will be ensured through a site management plan, which I'll talk about in another slide. So this is a site cap as it's proposed in the remedial action work plan. As you can see here, the areas in purple, I think, as you're seeing up there, are gray. That's asphalt. Green areas are 1 foot of clean soil. And the red and blue areas are concrete or foundation 6 inches or more.
Let's talk about stormwater management, Mr. Randy.
Sure. So the proposal is that stormwater management on the site will be captured on site and then discharged to the stormwater sewer system. So none of the stormwater that is produced or falls on site will ever get back into the pits from the site. The next piece of the remedial action work plan will be the institutional controls or the environmental easement. So what an environmental easement is, it's like a restriction that is put on the property that both the department and the volunteer have a stake in. And that requires certification of the vapor mitigation systems and the site cover yearly. It restricts groundwater use on the site. No one can use groundwater unless it's treated and approved by the DOH and any county authorities like a county health department. It prohibits the site use to commercial use, so you obviously can't build a house, residential home here, plant vegetables, anything like that. And it requires compliance with the site management plan, which is the next slide. So the site management plan is a document that is also filed, and the site owner and the DEC also have a plan in hand, and this dictates it has an excavation plan. So let's say a sewer utility is damaged and it needs to be excavated on site. There'll be an excavation plan that details any provisions for movement of soil, disposal of soil, and what needs to be done while that excavation has happened after the cap and the remedy is in place. There's an operation and maintenance plan for the vapor mitigation systems and site cover, and that also requires an inspection. A groundwater monitoring plan. There'll be wells put in on the site after the development is in place, and these wells will be monitored on to assess groundwater quality. And a requirement for the continued, obviously, as I said before, inspection and certification of the vapor mitigation systems and the cover. And that's all we have for you. So I guess we'll open up to.
Can you discuss whether we're approving the specific redevelopment of this as a hotel?
We are not approving the hotel development. It's remediated to a commercial standard. So anything that fits a commercial standard is okay with the DEC. We don't make approvals. That's more the villages. It has to do that through the seeker process. They're two separate. The development and the remediation are two separate things. But pieces of the development, obviously, the foundation would be considered a site cap. So I guess Sarah's going to walk around with the microphone so we can hear everybody.
Hello? Yep, it's on. Okay. We'll start with you. You can sit or stand.
Okay. Hi, my name is Judah Holstein. I'm at 64 Morgan Street in Eastchester. You started off your presentation with a great picture of the view sort of to, I think it was the southwest.
Sure.
One of the concerns I have is up the hill to the east. I think it's about a 60-foot elevation. It is one of the most densely populated areas in Eastchester. It's multifamily homes. It has the Waverly School. And, you know, I'm not clear on the vapor specifics, but even during the excavation process, how can you guarantee the safety of the people in that neighborhood during that process?
It's a good question. During the excavation and regrading portion of the remedy, we have what's called a community air monitoring plan that's put in place. And what that includes is monitors that go around the site, and then if any dusts or vapors are generated, an alarm signals, and they have to cease operations and deal with the dust or vapor mitigation. So that monitors upwind and downwind. So if we, receive vapors or dust from another construction site down the road, it'll still go off, but they'll be able to manage the vapors and the dust on site by that monitoring plan.
Is that ongoing even after the, I forget what you called it, but the radon equivalent? Because, with radon, right, you only have to build the pipe to the level of the top of the building.
Correct.
And, then the vapors are being shot out at lower than the 60 feet. I mean, would there be an impact ongoing?
There's, the Department of Health in Westchester has certifications for radon systems and SSDSs that mitigate vapors. That's a part of the SSDS installation. In addition to that, there may be a requirement to sample that stack periodically to see what the concentrations coming out are. Depending on the volume of contaminant coming out of those stacks, it's possible that a carbon filtration system or the like could be put in there to capture those vapors.
I'm glad you raised the issue of the houses up on the bluff. We've gotten a lot of concerns about whether those houses are potentially impacted by the Freon vapors, which is a different issue, but related. The one thing about Freon is that the density of Freon vapor is heavier than air, so it tends to sink and then follow along the groundwater table. So I think it would be very unlikely if any of the houses up on the hill were affected, and that's why we start our sampling right in the immediate vicinity of the site, because those are the buildings that would be most affected.
My name is John Henry Smith III. I live here in Tuckahoe on Washington Street. Now, does that contaminated groundwater affect our drinking water? Are you following where I'm going with this?
Yep, I
You
understand.
said that stuff is going all the way to the Bronx River, so it's coming right down Main Street and going that way.
Well, I think the items that we went over prior, there's no large conduit taking the groundwater with any speed away from the site. It's slowly coming out of the site. As it comes out of the site, it reduces as it goes out, and it's going down to the Bronx. The groundwater flows towards the Bronx River. Your drinking water is supplied by a private public entity, so that water is continually tested to make sure. That's correct. Continually tested.
64 years, believe me, I know. But is it affecting all of the? Excuse me. Is it affecting all of the people that live where they're going to build that new Marriott hotel, coming back toward Main Street, where the park is? All of those kids that are there's 200-300 kids in a 3-block area. Come down here to Main Street. Are you following me?
Yep, I understand.
I'm worried about the kids.
The groundwater is actually flowing in the opposite direction. So
Water don't flow uphill, sir.
yeah, well, you're saying that the park north of the site, correct?
Yes.
South. Okay. So
Water don't flow uphill.
yep, I understand what you're saying.
Nothing like that yet.
The site contaminants that would be impacted or have impacts like that, volatiles, VOCs in groundwater didn't show up. We didn't have any VOCs, so we'd be talking about metals, semi-volatile organic compounds, PCBs, and
PCBs are ceramic fission. Everything you put up on that screen is volatile. Everything.
actually no, not everything I put on. Volatile means that it is released in a gaseous form.
Okay,
So
and
it's-
can I try to help here? I want to clarify specifically what your concern is. You did mention groundwater and the potential impacts on drinking water. And as we stated, the water supply for this municipality is, first of all, located elsewhere. It's not anywhere near this site. And right, so it's not impacted by the site. So that's why that's not a concern. As far as potential impacts to people on the surface by groundwater that's flowing under the ground, again, we talked about direct contact. If that water was at the surface and people could come in contact with it, that would be a concern. But it's, how many feet below ground surface? 18 on site. So it's well enough below the ground surface that it's really not a very feasible contact scenario. So it's something that we just don't feel is going to happen. Is that, I mean, did that address your? Okay, good.
this man, and then I'll get to you. Don't worry. I'll get to everybody.
Good evening. First of all, Randy and your team and DOH, I'll be 85 years old very shortly. I've been born and raised in this village. And I want to thank you for coming down to the village. I knew we would have a room full of people. Unfortunately, this site is just too small for this kind of a meeting. But first of all, Randy, I gave you my second copy of the letter I sent you the first time. So I appreciate if you make that letter part of your investigation, and I hope I hear from you. And the gentleman there who's taking notes right now, as an 85-year-old, lifelong resident of this village, you're making me cry. I'm crying because 2 months ago, and if she was here with me, she would be smiling. She would be smiling that we're finally, after 64 years, I've been writing to you people, to the Board of Health. 64 years I begged for help, and no one came to help me, nor anyone else in this village. My question is, how many of these people died that shouldn't have died when they died? I had family members called the DeBellos on Chestnut. 5 in that family, upper respiratory and cancer. I lost 3 sisters the same way and a mother. And now I've been sick. Randy, I you on a couple issues. The children that are up on that hill. I'm talking about Hollywood. I'm talking about my street, which should be on your map. My house is directly behind this quarry. That's why when I wrote you that letter, I indicated all those municipal people and all those outside people and all those industrial people who dumped. Now, I wrote that letter. I haven't heard one person call and say I was wrong. I just lost a cousin. His name was Tootsie. That was his nickname, but he was Carapella. I wrote my first letter. He called me and he said I forgot a few things, and he reminded me, and he was right. There are so many that dumped into that quarry, and there was a lot of money made. And I want to tell you something. I'm ashamed of my village. I'm ashamed of all those mayors and the elected officials that sat back for 64 years and did nothing. And did nothing. And did nothing. And the DOH, I want to know what happened to all the letters that we sent to the Westchester County Department of Health. I want to know what happened to all my letters sent to the DEC. I was requested to write letters and indicate what I was seeing. I never heard of not a soul. I'm disappointed, but I want to tell you, sir, I forgot your first name. You made me cry, and the reason you made me cry was you told me to go after those polluters and let them pay for what they did to this village. That was the most pristine, the most gorgeous quarry you would ever lay your eyes on. I walked by that quarry to deliver 3 eggs to my father's sister who lived on Marbledale Road. And I went by it every morning. And you should have seen what I seen with that white marble reflecting off that gorgeous water. And yet, this village, for 64 years, closed their eyes, including the state, including the Department of Health. We had a 10-inch folder in this village, and I read it. And those were all the complaints by residents of this village that were concerned about what was going on. You can't find that folder no more. It's gone. I wonder why. I didn't want to really get onto this. I had some issues I wanted to talk about, but you got so many people here, I want to give them an opportunity to speak. But I, as a lifelong resident, thank you all for coming to the village of Tuckahoe and telling us what was going on and what some of the corrections would be. And the last thing I want to just say, on behalf of my late wife and myself and my family, she would be very happy today. She would be laughing like she's doing in heaven right now. She would be so happy that that place is going to be finally cleaned up. Thank you so much, and God bless you all.
Thank you for the comments. We're very sorry for your loss, and the DOH and I will get together and get you a response to your letter, and it'll be a part of the official record.
My name is Gail Pisha, and I represent the Sierra Club Lower Hudson Group. We have 3,000 members in Westchester County and about 240 in Eastchester, Tuckahoe, Bronxville, and New Rochelle. So I'm asking two questions. The one is, you mentioned the stormwater and sewer system runoff, that if there's construction and there's runoff or stormwater runoff, it'll go down the sewer, right? So you said nobody will get in contact with it, but where does it go when it goes down the sewer? It goes somewhere, right?
Correct. The stormwater will be segregated once the site's developed, so it'll go into the stormwater that is specified for Tuckahoe, and then I'm not really too clear on where the discharge points are for the stormwater, but most likely it should be somewhere in a wetland area or the Bronx River.
Right, because then that has implications for downstream, even though it might not be the residents here. So that's a concern for the ecology of the Bronx River and the Long Island Sound.
Right, absolutely.
Right.
All of the stormwater
Right.
is collected in Tuckahoe and is discharged, not just from the site itself.
Right.
And the site will segregate it, so it's not hitting any of the contaminated, any of the rainwater that's hitting the site. Once it's the remedy is in place, is culverted and it's taken into pipes and then taken out to the stormwater system. So it's not making contact with any of the landfill waste.
Right. Oh, okay. Well, I was thinking you said during construction and stuff.
During
anything would
construction, there's
rush off.
also something
Yeah.
called a stormwater pollution prevention plan that's in place. And that's filed with the DEC, and the town has to approve that as well, or excuse me, the village. And what that does is that does not allow any discharges of stormwater. They'll do celled excavations to make sure that not too much rainwater is pooled in there, and then if they get rid of any water, it has to be treated before it's released.
Okay. And then the other question I had about the water, you went through a lot of trouble to filter the turbid water to see what it would be like. But I'm just wondering, why don't you just test the water that's welling up at Bronxville High School and just determine that nothing is actually showing up in that water?
Well, there's a lot of space between Bronxville High School and the site, over 1.25 miles. So
Right.
it wouldn't be too clear of a picture if we took samples all the way down at Bronxville and said, well, you know, we have these items in it. We'd have to go all the way back up to the site sampling to make sure that nothing was missed along the way. So,
Right. But wouldn't you want to know if the people in Bronxville want to know that this is coming up? And also, I did hear that some people do use water for the irrigation, even though they're not drinking it, so there could be potential for contact, couldn't it?
that's a possibility, yes.
Hi, my name is Renata Meyer. I'd like to ask you to go into some detail on the type of filter that was used for your studies, what exactly it filters out, and what your rationale was for conducting your studies that way.
Sure. So the filter that we used to pull the turbid samples, the soils out of those samples, is called a micron filter. And it doesn't pull out anything that's dissolved in water. So let's envision if you had a glass of warm water and we put a bunch of salt in it. We said we want to see how much salt is dissolved in this water. And we took a drink of it, you'd get grains in your mouth and you'd also get the salt water. So in order to get the dissolved salt out from the grains, we used a filter. It was an assembly where it's screwed onto the sample jar, and then there's pressure on one side versus the other, and the water percolates through that filter. It's like a coffee filter, basically.
It's only designed to remove particulate matter?
Correct.
Nothing else?
Nothing dissolved.
Okay, and what was the rationale?
Well, the rationale for that is that when we're sampling groundwater, we seek to get clean or non-turbid samples that don't have soils in it. If if you have soils in the groundwater, it kind of taints the sample. Stuff is stuck to the soil. Stuff hasn't dissolved inside the water. So you want to make sure that we're grabbing the dissolved phase, the stuff that is in the water that could be moving away from the site.
It's not representative
So-
of what could migrate.
So you're assuming that no particulate matter can migrate?
That is correct.
And how is that a fair assumption?
Well, under the ground surface, unless you had a large pipe or something that was sucking water out, it's a very slow movement. So the particulates wouldn't move; they just sit in place.
I would dispute that. My name is Don Hughes. I'm a consulting engineer hired by local citizens. My specialty is in environmental chemistry. The filter that you're referring to does, in fact, give a distorted picture because sometimes organics and metals stick to the filter. So you don't, the filter is an imperfect measurement. And my understanding is that groundwater can, in fact, carry particles. It can certainly carry complexed metals. But I have some bigger concerns about this site. Mr. Marinello has testified in an affidavit about all the dumping that has taken place at this site. And what I want to know is how we're assuming, the department seems to be assuming that there's nothing bad down there. No drums or tanks or anything like that. And yet, indications are from the history that that's what's down there. And we know right now from the Freon, the high concentrations of Freon, that there's leaking tanks or leaking equipment buried in that site, that dump site. And I wonder how did you come up with this hotspot removal when we know so little really about what's in there? There are not that many soil borings that have been taken, certainly none at depth. We've got in the south lobe, there's one single sample that goes all the way down to the bottom. And in the north lobe, there's none. The deepest one goes about halfway down. So we don't know what's down there. And I would suggest that we should at least do a magnetometer survey, maybe dig some trenches to see what's down there so you can actually identify hotspots, real hotspots, like drums. That's concern number one. Concern number two occurs on page 1 of the remedial action work plan. It says the groundwater is what does it say? It says it's impeded by the marble. Well, the marble, the underlying bedrock, everyone acknowledges is highly fractured. So the groundwater is carrying contaminants off-site. It has to be. It must be moving. So why is there not any kind of monitoring of the groundwater downstream of the site? Like, it doesn't have to be at all the way down to Bronxville High School. It could be just downstream of the site. Why not do that? We need to know how much contamination is moving off-site. We can't just assume that it's not moving on-site because that just doesn't make any sense.
I think we have that addressed with our off-site investigation. Certainly we're going to be doing investigation of the other pits or areas of the pits not investigated under the BCP site. In addition to that, the King's Electronics site didn't see any type of turbid soils during their investigation and remedy. A lot of soil borings and wells were installed on that site, so that gives us an indication there's no significant contamination migrating south in groundwater from the site. As far as the remedial action work plan, that's still a draft document, which we're commenting on tonight. You guys are commenting on tonight. So there'll be changes made to that document post this meeting, post all of the public comments and DEC, DOH comments. I think I got everything there.
I read Mr. Marinello's affidavit and his letter, and he speaks very passionately about how he came home from the war and he smelled the horrible things that were going on at the landfill and the burning and the disposal. And it's important to keep in mind that if there's any attempt to go digging into the landfill and to remove drums and tanks that we acknowledge could be in the landfill, I hope I made clear that we acknowledge there is bad stuff in this landfill, or could be. All of the conditions that you so eloquently described could be repeated if there's an attempt to go digging into this landfill to try to look for things that we don't know where they are, and any attempt is made to remove them. What we have found is that really the only thing that could be affecting people is the vapor, and we are taking steps to address that vapor. But, you know, I've worked on landfills for more than 30 years, and the state of the art, unfortunately, is to cap them in place and to manage them the best you can and avoid people getting exposed to what might be inside of them. There was one disastrous attempt in the town of Huntington on Long Island in the 90s when they tried to carve away part of their landfill so they could build a trash burning facility. And for an entire summer, the community stunk. Every night, the odors would lay low in the valley, people were getting sick, and it was a horrible situation. And I would not wish that on anyone. So when we talk about doing something about the landfill, be very careful what you wish for, because digging it up and going looking inside of it is not a good idea.
But my question is, you've identified hotspots. Okay. So you've identified hotspots. How did you identify hotspots? What's the criteria for identifying those hotspots? And what about all the parts of the landfill that we have no information on?
The hotspots were identified through soil concentrations that exceeded the standard, which we're trying to meet at the site. So anything above commercial in these hotspots areas will be removed. And in addition to that, I did mention that after the excavations take place, there's endpoint sampling, which means the bottom of the excavation and the sides will be sampled to make sure that those standards are met. In addition, while the site is being graded, if any grossly contaminated material, such as a drum, metal parts, are found on the site, they will be characterized and removed.
But the parts of the landfill we don't know anything about. There's whole sections. This thing is a football field in size, and we've got 6 points. What about the rest of it?
Outside the BCP site?
In the BCP site. South Lobe, for example, is the size of a football field. There's 6 borings in the RI that penetrate to some depth. There's only one that goes to the bottom. There's another one that goes maybe 50 feet down. There's so much that we don't know about what's in there. They're just simply not characterized.
If I may add to what George said earlier, DEC do agree with you that there may be some bad stuff at the subsurface. But the question is anybody being exposed to it? What DOH said is there are 3 ways to which people can be exposed to those to that type of contamination. I think sometimes the way I try to explain this to people is this, okay. Sometimes we all have beer or so in our fridge, right? If you don't open that beer and drink it, you will not get drunk. So we understand that there are some materials below the surface, but the question is, do we have any contact with it? Do people actually play within that depth? Does vapor get to people's houses? And do people drink from that water? And based on the analysis from DOH, they said no, none of those things are happening. Just like George said, do you really want us to go down there and try to excavate? And think about how many trucks will go through the village of Tuckahoe just to try to remove those materials. Not to talk of the type of vapor or exposure that will result from doing that.
Yes, this is Albert Stern. I understand there have been failures in capping. Maybe you can tell me what the percentage of failures you've had with capping? And I have one more question after that.
I've only worked on 2 landfills other than this one, and both landfill caps that were employed at those 2 facilities.
What about your department?
I think
What's your history?
several landfills.
How many failures have you had?
None that we know of.
We've had erosion problems in big storm events over the cap, but the cap is rarely damaged.
So you've had no major problems with capping, is that correct? The second question I had is Bronxville had a brownfield project, it's still working on it, I guess, and they used a full excavation. Can you tell me why you aren't using a full excavation here as you did in Bronxville?
Sure. I think the site you're speaking about is probably Kensington Road, possibly?
Yes.
Okay, so Kensington Road, I think it was a former gas station.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm not sure if the site was deemed a significant threat or not. However, the remedy that was proposed at that site was a shallow excavation of all the soils down to bedrock. So I believe the removal was around anywhere from 15 to 2 feet of soil across the site. That's an unrestricted cleanup. No soils left on site because they're building a facility that will have a parking garage or a commercial building, residential building there.
They're actually going into bedrock too at that site.
Correct.
Yep.
First, thanks to the DOH, DEC, and all of you who are speaking up tonight. Greatly appreciated. Had a couple of questions, having attended 2 previous village meetings, one of which was a planning board meeting. One of my concerns was about the nature of how the sites for testing are chosen, and Mr. Hughes made reference to that, and also the neutrality of the people who do the testing. It was my understanding from previous meetings that one of the environmental specialists that was utilized was somebody who was contracted by the developer for the site. I'm very interested in independent research and viewpoints that have been passed along to the DEC, and want some reassurances that those are being given due consideration in terms of comments, reports that have been passed along by independent people. You had made reference when you were speaking about the testing, you spoke of, and you used the word a couple of times, volunteer, and I didn't know who that volunteer was, who appointed that volunteer, who picked them, what balance do we have? That's question 1. Question 2 is a little shorter. Go ahead.
So the site was investigated by the volunteer, which is Baldwin Associates, who's building the or proposing the hotel.
Excuse me, the developer.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And then the developer hired an environmental firm, Hydro Environmental, to do these investigations. The DEC reviews the work that's submitted, approves, disapproves, modifies those reports and plans, and also provides oversight as well.
In, assessing.
Pardon?
In assessing a brownfield site, please help me to understand why it is not the DEC that does the testing start to finish. Why the person who is interested in developing the site gets any kind of connection to what should be a neutral scientific investigation. I'd like to understand that process a little better.
Well, the brownfield cleanup program was developed so that sites could be remediated and redeveloped. So that's the significance of the. That's why it wouldn't go to Superfund. So an agreement is struck, and then an investigation, remediation is conducted by the volunteer so that they can redevelop the site, and that's a part of the program.
But the short answer is the state doesn't have enough money to do all the brownfield
And does that mean that the developer pays for, what you say a volunteer? I don't know if that's a paid volunteer or an unpaid volunteer. I'm just trying to get some
you're-
clarity on that. I'm concerned about conflicts of interest.
So you're asking, does the DEC or the state pay the developer to do the work?
Does the developer pay the environmental tester to do a report that is not sent?
That's correct, they do.
And that, in my mind, registers, uh-oh. Okay, and how do we balance that with what independent research and reports have been contributed by, interested parties in the community?
So the DEC considers any report or document that's submitted. However, under the Brownfields program, the developer hires the contractor to do the work. The DEC approves their work, reviews it, to make sure that it's consistent with the standards and any applicable guidance that's available for the environmental concerns at the site.
Okay, I appreciate your answering that, although I have to say I don't find the answer reassuring.
Oh, I'm sorry. The laboratory that does the chemical analysis is also independent. And there's, in addition to that, whenever the lab samples are collected, there's a data usability summary that's used, and that's another party that does that analysis to make sure the data is usable.
Okay. The last question that I have for you is the gentleman who spoke earlier took us 50 or 60 years back into the past. I want to take us 50 or 60 years into the future and then get us back to the present. In terms of monitoring that site for vapors, for contamination of any kind, my concern is if that should happen, and we all hope and pray that it doesn't, if that happens, whether we expect it or not, what is then in place if that environmental accident has already occurred to deal with it, other than residents having to move away, other than a situation like in Flint, Michigan, where indeed residents were told testing was done, the water was okay, and now we have thousands of people in trouble. Don't want to see a repeat performance of that. Not for my next door neighbor an inch from the site, not for my not so close neighbors 3 miles away in Bronxville or in Eastchester. So how does that monitoring work? And if we find something, do we just abandon the place? What can be done in the aftermath of that?
So I also forgot to mention another party that was involved with the conflict of interest things that you're bringing up, that the village has also hired an environmental consultant, HDR, that reviews everything as well. So that's another party outside that submits comments, reviews work plans, reviews reports.
Okay.
So, but to get to the other question about the site management portion of the site, the developer or whoever takes over the site is bound to that site management plan. They have to monitor and certify that these controls are in place. And the monitoring portion includes sampling of that stack that we talked about, possibly installing a carbon filtration system, monitoring groundwater on site. So if any new information comes to light about the concentrations coming out of the stack, that also...
Excuse me, that's during the course of construction.
No.
Okay.
That's post-construction.
Post-construction,
Site management
okay.
plan comes in after the site's been remedied and the development has taken place.
Okay, so the second part of my second question was, if there is something detrimental that happens, what alternative do we have as a community after the fact? What provision is made for compensation of people, safety of people? I mean, that's the looking ahead part that I was talking about. I hope a plan works and works well, but we're only talking about a tiny piece of this contaminated area that will allow for some commercial financial gain if it's developed, but nothing is really being remedied in terms of the brownfield situations. And my question at the Village Hall meeting was, you know, sometimes is it better just to leave a site untouched rather than risk any of this? I don't want a Marriott hotel that gets named the Marriott Pandora Hotel, and that's a major concern for me.
It's a good question. So based on the remedy that's been discussed here, we believe that if the remedy has taken place, the site will be safer for the community than it is if it's left undone.
Even if it's only that small percentage of it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And in addition to that, the state will also be doing its own investigation of those off-site areas, the other pieces of the landfill.
Which they can do nothing about unless the parties who created the toxic mess are willing to put money.
That's not
toward
true.
it?
No.
Okay.
State Superfund can fund that.
What was the portion of the comments you made where you said that the people who had done some of the polluting had to be held accountable in some way before the Superfund could step in? That you have to make an attempt to get money from the perpetrators, so to speak, before you can step in. And we all know that it's not unusual for those kinds of litigations to go on, could go on for 10 years.
Well, that's why the Superfund exists, so that if there is a drawn-out legal proceeding, the state can say, enough is enough, we're going to spend state money and proceed. And then when we're done, we'll bill you guys at the end of the day.
Okay, so then you have to determine, sort of like Bernie Sanders, when the enough is enough point comes in.
The other thing on your long-term management issue is, in order to complete this project, the developer is going to have to grant an easement to New York State in perpetuity. And that is a property right granted from the owner to New York State that gives us access to sample and to perform any additional remedy that might be necessary if the developer, if something happens and the developer does not follow through on it.
Then does ultimate responsibility then rest with New York State on the outcome of this?
Well, certainly to review the ongoing monitoring that occurs. We would say that ultimately the responsibility lies with the developer, but if the developer fails to follow through, we are granted this property right that allows the state, similar to the Superfund, to step in and take action.
Okay, but the time frame is...
Yeah, again, but remember, the stuff has been there for 40 years at least since the landfill closed.
Right, but it's been there untouched.
Untouched.
And we're all here happily at least able to talk about it. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Good evening. Thank you, Randy. As a hydrogeologist, I have some concerns about the direction things are heading in. First, as Don pointed out, chemically, we do not know the full horizontal or vertical extent of contamination. What we do know is limited, and it's only limited to within the brownfield portion of the site itself. It doesn't include the other 30 some odd percent to the south and the other 72% to the north. So as a hydrogeologist, the way I approach contaminated sites is I do an investigation of the entire site, everywhere, the whole thing, the site area, and then the off-site impact. So I guess my one question would be, what would the rationale be for separating this out, this little brownfield section, and not doing a comprehensive full investigation and just putting the remedial actions on hold until we have the whole picture hydrogeologically, and then we can make informed decisions about what remediation makes sense and whether we should be putting a hotel or anything on the site until we know what's there and what remedial actions make sense.
That's actually a piece of the program that you're correct. If the site was in state Superfund, we'd do the whole quarry. However, a piece of that portion it's been selected out so the state doesn't have to pay for it. It's not coming out of Superfund money. The other portions will be done as an off-site investigation of potential inactive hazardous waste site by the state. That's just a piece of the brownfield law and program that we deal with.
Well, my suggestion as a professional hydrogeologist is that you put an immediate stop on all brownfield action, do a complete comprehensive investigation of the entire site, on-site and off-site, then talk about decisions. And then you used a geologic cross-section I constructed through the valley, and you then mentioned that there was a 550-foot deep well nearby, and you mentioned that it geologically was not in the marbles, correct?
There was no marble in in the well at all.
Right. In the geologic work that I've presented, I point out that there's a narrow band of the marble that goes down the valley. It sounds to me, without you giving me the location of the well, that you're just a little bit off to the east, and you're in some of the schists and nice deposits, rock units, so that there's no comparison that can be made hydrogeologically, and certainly no comparison to conduits that would form only in carbonate zones. So I think you need to examine that.
Actually, there were some wells done to the west in the parking lot of the King's Electronics facility that are directly in line with the marble pits running laterally, and there was no marble found there as well. They tagged bedrock, which was schist.
Well, please share them, and we'll take a look.
Sure.
Thanks.
So you mentioned something about the vapors are migrating and you don't really know why, and that's something you're going to investigate. But you know, I'm just curious if the idea that the vapors are migrating is something that indicates that there is movement on the site, and you know, also what are you doing about the workers on the site? And then the last question, these are all kind of related to the vapor issue, is, you know, what actually happens with the release of the vapors that are caught in the, what is it called, the
Subslab
depressurization
system.
slab, yeah. And, you know, where are they actually being released? And, is, you know, even if Freon's heavy, it's going to then drop down, you know.
I'm going to try to repeat your question. I don't think you had that.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. It's okay. So I heard the discharge point. What happens to the vapors that are coming out of the stacks? What are we doing about site workers that are working on the site when vapors are generated? And how do we know what's moving off the site vapor-wise underneath the buildings?
You said something about the fact that you didn't really understand why the vapors had moved from the site of the pits. That there seem to be vapors that are coming up that are not in the pit.
Right, that's correct. So the higher concentrations that we found of vapors were more towards the buildings and outside of the pits themselves. It doesn't mean that it's not coming from the pits or the landfill waste itself, but the investigation needs to be completed to make sure we don't have an off-site source. I mean, there's a lot of automotive history along Marbledale Road, specifically in those areas. And freons are changed out of AC units. So we want to make sure that we know there's probably freon in the landfill itself, but is there another source outside of the landfill itself? And to the point about the site workers, the community air monitoring plan that I spoke of earlier, that also monitors air continually on site to make sure that workers are safe during the work. Correct. Steve just mentioned a health and safety plan, which is also part of the remedial action plan, and that also covers vapor exposures.
Anyway, the last thing I'd like to say is I think part of the reason why there's a lot of concern in the community is that a lot of us have a lot of groundwater in our houses. You know, that there's a lot of homes in this area that, you know, have sump pumps and that are constantly dealing with water migrating into the house. So I just think you guys ought to take that.
Sure. The major component that, you know, is a risk when water is getting into the house would be exposure to the volatile organics, which we demonstrated aren't in groundwater moving off site. In addition to that, the groundwater that is seen in the study, you know, metals, that sort of thing, it's dissolved. I mean, unless you're drinking that water, you don't have any exposure to it.
Someone back here, this one. No.
Thank you. Hi, my name is David Gordon. I'm an attorney. I'm representing Key Martial Arts, some of the folks who are concerned about this. First, I want to echo what Mr. Marinello said. And, you know, up to about 2 weeks ago, you know, we were just looking at the BCP site, and I know a lot of folks, not me, but a lot of other folks sent letters up to DEC, to the commissioner, asking for a broader look at the rest of the landfill, and the fact that we're now looking at the P site designation is something we do really appreciate. Want to thank you for it. Want to thank the commissioner for it. We do look forward to really working on this cleanup. It's something that's really important, and just really pleased that the department was responsive to that request. Having said that, I do have a couple of concerns, some of which echo some of the things that have been said before, and some of which go a little bit beyond. There are two sets of problems, I think, with the way you're, with the approach you're taking right now, and I just want to mention them and then go into a little bit of detail. First, I want to echo what Paul Rubin said. I think that for most people, it doesn't make sense from an environmental perspective to divide this up into an inactive hazardous waste site investigation for the areas of the land, for the areas of the dump, the old dump, that are outside of the BCP site, and then a separate one for the brownfield site. It's worth saying the obvious. The only thing that separates the brownfield site from the other areas of those pits is a subdivision line that was drawn up by a landowner at some time in the past and recorded in the county deeds office. There's absolutely nothing physical that separates that the toxic dump that you're looking at as an inactive hazardous waste site from the brownfield. It is a unified environmental resource, at least each separate pit is, and probably the whole thing. From a management perspective, from a physical perspective, from a practical perspective, it makes absolutely no sense to manage these separately. And the answer that you gave to Paul was, to use a word, it was just bureaucratic. It was like, well, we have an application here on this one, and we don't have an application here on this one, and oh, this is going to save us a few bucks. I understand where you're coming from on it, but I think it's fair to say that most people who are concerned about this, that doesn't really ring true. I also want to note that even when you answered the question as to, you know, how are we going to know about migration, you said we were going to look at the off-site investigation basically on the inactive hazardous waste site. Well, the question was actually referring to the BCP, and so you're actually using the off-site investigation for the inactive hazardous waste site to answer questions about the brownfield site. And the problem with this, of course, is that the brownfield site, the RAWP, is going to move forward first. You have to answer the questions first about the resource before you can decide about what to do about it. And so, again, those two aspects of it pose a very serious problem in terms of how to manage the site moving forward. I also want to express concern over what appears to be a kind of very narrow series of observations about the routes of exposure. Because you're looking at, okay, people are breathing it, and you've got that one. Are people drinking the water? No, because we're on the New York City water supply. Are people touching this? Well, not really on this dump site, but it's very, very clear that we were all acknowledging that groundwater does migrate off-site. We know that the flow is generally from the north down to the south, southwest toward the Bronx and Bronxville and the Bronx River. It's going through the soil. Whether or not we can, whatever's happening with the conduits, and we will probably learn a lot more about that, we know that the groundwater is migrating off the site. We know that it's heavily contaminated. You've made a number of assumptions about whether we're looking at particulates or just dissolved metals and some other things. I think we all have a lot of questions about that. Overall, and the other thing is, when it does migrate off-site, the problem is, you've heard people say this here in Tuckahoe and in Bronxville, there's very high water tables. Ultimately, the water that's in the groundwater is released to the surface. It might be all the way down in the Bronx River. It might be in the basements in Tuckahoe. It might be in the basements in Bronxville. There is exposure. There's exposure in people's homes and basements. There's also exposure when it gets released into ponds and wetlands. And whether or not people are swimming in it there or not, we don't really know. Also, when it does get exposed to the surface, it gets released into the environment. Ultimately, the regulations require you to prevent migration of contaminants off-site, even for a BCP site. And you haven't done that yet. You've made a series of assumptions that are essentially assuming the problem away. And that is not convincing at this point. You're making too many assumptions that have too many questions. When you were asked about the capping, and you explained that, well, that's going to separate the rain from getting into the landfill. And the presumption there is that if you separate the rain coming into the landfill, you take away the water source, and so there's going to be less leaching out or no leaching out. But the fact is, there's water coming into the landfill from the north through the ground. If you take away the rain coming into it, assuming the cap works, you've still got all this water coming from the north, which is supplying water to the landfill and to the leaching. So it appears that the rationales are sort of cumulative. They don't really hold water. And there's one more. You've come up with a series of mechanisms, primarily the filtering, to, in some cases, reduce the levels of concentration, those big lines, and kind of stuff them down below the MCL, below the maximum contaminant level. What you haven't discussed is, from the reports that we've seen, there are many, many, many contaminants. And even if you were able to push all of them below that 1 part per billion MCL or whatever, if you add all the contaminants together, and I know this is literally apples and oranges, you might get 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 parts per billion of different contaminants with all kinds of thank you, synergistic effects. So my point is that there's a whole series of assumptions, and ultimately what we're looking for here is a management structure that keeps these contaminants on site and that prevents them from migrating out instead of reasons why it's not such a big deal.
Just very briefly, it's important for the lay people in the room to understand that just because groundwater is leaving the site does not necessarily mean that groundwater contamination is leaving the site. These are two different things. The formation, to a large degree, filters the contamination out, and that's why the state of the science is to take filtered samples, because they best represent what is potentially mobile. We will investigate the off-site impacts. We will investigate the groundwater as part of the greater Quarry investigation. However, we do not see a reason not to move forward with the remedy for this portion of the Quarry. The state of the art for dealing with landfills is pretty basic. You cap it, you prevent rainwater from infiltrating, and you prevent people from being exposed to what could be inside of it. And nothing really changes when you look at the bigger part of the landfill.
Good evening. My name is Alali Tamuno, and I'm the DEC project attorney for this site. I just wanted to respond to something I think Emma had questioned the concept of a volunteer and a participant. Those terms are defined in the environmental conservation law and the implementing regulations. So when we get BCP applications, we review the package and make a determination based on the information provided to the DEC whether that particular applicant is a volunteer or a participant. So those terms are defined in the regs and in the law. And someone had asked a question about the state superfund, and they had questioned whether there was a bureaucracy. And I just want to add to what Randy and George said, there is a legal process. And the DEC is bound by the legal process, both in the environmental conservation law and the state finance law. So we have to go through that legal process before we access state superfund money to conduct the investigation or remediation. With the P designation for the offsite, we have started the legal process. So it is a legal process.
And for those of you who applaud us for going after the responsible parties, Alali is the person who's going to do it.
Hi, my name is Susan Leifer, and I've spent about a year fighting fracking. And the beginning talk about fracking is it's safe, it's clean, it's just a few household chemicals that go down. It doesn't do this and it doesn't do that. I think everybody here is really saying, yes, this is what you're saying, it's safe. We've learned from an environmental point of view that things that start out looking safe don't always end up safe. And then what happens, the remediation is slow. You wait till the water is poisoned, or you wait till the land is poisoned, and then you finally get some action. And very often the people who caused the disturbance have moved off or gone bankrupt or whatever. So there's a certain amount of cynicism that I hear tonight that you can't really guarantee that this is going to be inert, that this is, you're going to build on it and we're not going to notice it afterwards. In fact, it's going to make it better. I think that's been said so many times in so many different ways, and we've found that it's not true. I mean, unfortunately, the people who contaminated the site should have immediately done something to take care of the site. The fact that they've gone and they've left and that we don't really know what's down all the 100 feet, it doesn't feel very secure. And I think that's what you're hearing tonight. And I have experienced it. The people in Dimmock were told that their water was clean. It turns out that their water was not clean, and then again, various other places in the country. So it's a very hard thing to keep the contaminants controlled, and lots of things can happen, and that's why you're hearing tonight that we're not sure.
I can certainly appreciate where you're coming from. I think what we're saying here tonight is that this is an environmental problem. There are exceedances of soil concentrations. There are exceedances of vapor. There are exceedances of groundwater. However, doing nothing isn't as protective as the remediation that that's been proposed.
I'm Betsy Harding. I'm a resident of Bronxville, and I have, I guess it's 3 questions. One is, could you give me the site number for the King's Electronics site?
I think I can after the show. I think I've got it written down.
Okay, and because the conclusion that the water can't be, I still don't really understand what conclusions you're drawing specifically from the data in the King's Electronic site review. But that's really the source of your conclusion, or the DC's current conclusion, that contaminants can't be flowing off-site.
No, we're not saying that contaminants aren't flowing off-site. What was proposed was a large discharge of contaminants through a large conduit. We're saying that we didn't see those conduits at elevation below ground to say that that's occurring, that large burst of contamination we don't believe is happening.
All right, so, but that's, okay, so, but you're basing that conclusion on the record in this other proceeding?
On the record in the other proceeding?
The record in the review of the other brownfield site, the King's Electronic site?
Correct, yeah, it's down
so,
gradient.
Okay, is that record now at the Tuckahoe Public Library as part of the record in this review?
It's possible.
Well, if it's not there, can you put it there so that people could review that?
We sure
Because
can.
that's now very crucial data for this.
Okay. George just indicated that they'll stop by the Tuckahoe Library to check to see if it's on the record there.
King's Electronic.
Yes, it was probably associated with site management. So they've completed their remediation on site, and they have a site management protocol to continue on. So I have this the number for King's Electronics if you're ready for it. It's V 00
00
23
23
71.
71.
Oh, excuse me, 7. No 1 at the end.
No 1 at the end. Okay. Okay. Then my next question is, my understanding of the brownfield program is the developer / volunteer does get reimbursed for the cost of whatever the cleanup is, or the remediation plan, through the form of tax credits, if not direct reimbursement.
That is
Isn't
correct.
that correct? Okay.
That is correct.
So I would like to know how much this remediation plan is projected to cost.
I don't have any estimates on the cost. That's not something that the developer or I believe they write it in the remedial action work plan, but the final costs, we don't review those. It's not something that we do. We would under state superfund because we're spending the money, but however.
Right. So because that's taxpayer money. In other words, basically if you proceed ahead and sort of approve this remediation plan, New York State taxpayers are paying for it in the form of tax credits. Who reviews that? I mean, to me, it seems like a terrific waste of money to be putting in this sort of partial remediation thing without having done a full investigation of the entire site. In other words, it doesn't come out of the DEC budget, but it does cost New York State taxpayers a substantial amount of money.
That's correct. So it's handled by tax and finance. The amount of reimbursement based on the level of cleanup at a site, and there's a tax credit for the remediation. However, state superfund is funded with taxpayer dollars as well. So the bang for the buck is better with the BCP program than it usually is with state superfund.
Right, but it's not free. I mean, you know, the developer does not absorb the cost.
The developer absorbs some of the cost because the tax credit that's given is not 100% reimbursement for his remediation expenses. It's only partial. So he bears some of it as opposed to state superfund where the state would bear 100% of the cost.
But in any case, it just seems to be like whether it's the developer's money or the state's money or a combination, it's just wasteful to go ahead with a plan that's just covering a part of the site before you know what's going on with the full site or have really reviewed the off-site issues.
One of the reasons we're not privy to the cost is that we don't evaluate cost as a component. We evaluate protectiveness, both for public health and the environment. And you know, you heard health say that the elements of the remedy are protective of public health. We believe that the elements of the remedy, given the fact that it's a landfill that's 150 feet deep, that capping it is the state of the science with respect to landfills. So we evaluate it as we would a Superfund site with respect to the criteria that the law says we are supposed to look at in terms of protectiveness.
Okay, then my final question is, in the P proceeding, which is now going to be very crucial for a lot of people here, what opportunities are there for the DEC to disclose what you're doing and also for public comment?
So it'll start out that the DEC, if the DEC does the work through state superfund or a responsible party, would generate a site characterization work plan. That site characterization work plan will be put in the site repository for people to review and comment on.
Okay, so
and after the site characterization is completed, there's a site characterization report that's also generated, and that also has the opportunity for public comment as well.
Okay, is this going to be given a number or name or?
Yes.
How do we go find it?
It has been given a number already, and I don't know what it is. Give me 2 minutes, I can find it.
We can give it to you.
Great, thank you very much.
No problem.
I have a question. It seemed to me when you showed the soil samples, they were all done to the east of the quarry. And the topography of the land, the water goes south and west. So I think that more samples are all around the quarry need to get done.
The soil samples or the vapor samples?
Well, I don't know what it was, whatever sampling you showed was all on the east side.
Right, that was the map with the,
Yeah.
Yep, those were the vapor samples that were collected on site.
Okay.
We found through doing the vapor sampling on site, basically down the center of the site, that there were vapor impacts. And so at the DEC and DOH's request, a volunteer went back out and did sampling along the perimeter where the site boundary is next to the buildings.
Right, but what I'm saying is that I would like, you know, a larger area all around tested because I'm in Bronxville and I would like to take care of the earth. And Bronxville is considering building these tanks under the sports fields to hold the flood water so we don't have to pay millions of dollars every time it floods. And they are then going to pump it out into the Bronx River. And I don't feel comfortable if there is contaminated water. We're storing, so the kids are playing on top of it, and then we're taking it and pumping it into the Bronx River. So right now, if we don't do anything, it's happening, but we're not causing, you know, being an extra cause to it. So I don't know what the town should consider doing, holding off, or are we going to end up being a water treatment facility because we've built these storage tanks?
The groundwater contamination that we showed on site, the impacts were from mainly PAHs or the SVOCs. So the vapor issues that are volatiles we didn't see too many of on site. So it's a slow drip down towards the Bronx River, and the amount of contamination from the site. I think we went through the conduit flow in the previous slides, but I understand where you're coming from.
Hi, my name is Rachel Zolotev. I wanted to address something that was brought up before by Mr. Heitzman about, he was saying something to the effect of be careful what you wish for. Actually, there seems to be a lot of confusion between what we are asking for and what the proposed remedies might be. We don't know what the proposed remedies might be because we do not know what is in the site. And what has got a lot of people here very concerned is that since you do not know what is in the site, since even testing for things like dioxin, which had been requested, you in your own email to Mr. Hughes had said dioxin precursors are usually indicated by industrial chemical fires, industrial incinerators, all which are markers on the site, has been refused to be tested for. So right now, in what has been read in the Remedial Action Work Plan, there is this hotspot idea, which goes up to about 20 feet of digging into the soil, yet you don't know what's in that soil. We don't know what vapors could be released. We have no idea what kind of impacts with the dust and all the rest. And as far as what we're wishing for is a complete, thorough examination of the entire site. All that was put in Mr. Hughes's environmental report with the Magnum monitors, if that's the right way to say it, with full chemical and vapor and soil testing, all which was indicated in Mr. Marinello's affidavit, because many of the chemical compounds that have been found that exceed levels in the site right now indicate that almost pretty much everything that Mr. Marinello said was dumped there, yet you have not gone further and tested for pharmaceuticals. You've not tested for any of actually, I would say the majority of what was indicated in that letter. So this is what the action would be. We are not asking for any kind of digging, any kind of vapor release until you have actually thoroughly examined the site. Thank you.
So the dioxin and furan reference, we use precursor chemicals to determine whether we need to test for dioxins and furans. And those precursor chemicals were either very low or did not show up on the site. That's...
Yes, and then Mr. Hughes mentioned to you that in all of the soil borings, incredible amounts of ash and fly ash, which indicate coming from incinerators, are present. And dioxin is actually known as one of the residual effects of this kind of fly ash. And in your own email, you indicated that one of the other kinds of indicators of dioxin are, in fact, industrial incinerator fires or chemical fires. There are many witness reports of massive amounts of chemical fires on this site. The site would spontaneously combust. So, and you had never, and actually in that same email, Mr. Hughes had responded, he sent you pictures of the 2 incinerator stacks that are still sitting. One is sitting in Tuckahoe at the Riverview, which used to be a pharmaceutical plant and pharmaceutical incinerator, and the other one is currently sitting in the Chester Department of Public Works, which had their large incinerator.
Incinerator ash does not necessarily mean that there's dioxins and furans in the landfill. I mean, that's... We've tested landfills before, and the ash doesn't necessarily mean that that chemical is there. The precursor chemicals do. So when we see those chemicals, that triggers a analysis for those chemicals.
I put into my report data from Onondaga County. This is a modern state-of-the-art incinerator that's currently in operation. Data gathered over 20 years where they tested the ash for dioxins. It's consistently present in every sample for dioxins and furans, far above what EPA considers to be safe for a residential site, far above what's even considered safe for an industrial site. I think I looked at the factor on the way down here. It was 12 times the US EPA cleanup level for dioxins. This is a modern incinerator, not an old 1950s version of an incinerator. In addition to that, you have these chemical fires that Mr. Marinello alluded to. Another separate contributor of dioxins. I don't understand why you would refuse to test for dioxins. What's the downside? Why wouldn't we want to know? Maybe there's none there, but we don't know. We have no data.
Well, there's also no exposure risk from the dioxins.
There is soil vapor. That's not true. That is not true. And the limits for the established by the Department of Health are extremely low. 0.00001 micrograms per cubic meter. Very low.
In addition, the data that you submitted from the Onondaga County Industrial Incinerator has scrubbers on the incinerator, so that pulls the dioxins out of the air and deposits them in the ash. A lot of these incinerators that were in place before the scrubbers were used, they didn't take the dioxins out of the air, so they didn't allow the dioxins were released through the air, so they didn't show up in the fly ash.
Okay, these are all rationalizations. I think many people have spoken to the fact that you can rationalize all you want, but without real data, you don't know. Off-site contamination of groundwater could be happening. We have some data, which we haven't seen yet. The dioxins could be there, but we have no data. We have no data below 50 feet. No chemical tests, none.
Hello.
Back here, sorry.
Hi, all right. Michael Denning, 125 Marbledale Road. The hot spots you were speaking of, the size as far as cubic yards that would be excavated and then scraped. I know there's going to be additional for the scraping, but what depths are you going at those? Because those appear to be at the corners of my building. The south side and the north side of my building are the two hot spots that I see, besides another hot spot. Maybe that was an air sample that was at the north side. The other hot spot's by where the restaurant's going to go? On the north side by Broken Bow?
Right, we didn't put a figure up that showed the hot spot removal because we don't have an aerial figure of the areas that will be removed. We have just an estimate of the amount of soil. The figure that you're referring to is the vapor points that triggered us to go onto your property to do the sampling.
Right, okay. And then as far as elevation of sea level of the location, and for argument's sake, elevation of sea level for Bronxville High School field. As was stated earlier, water won't flow uphill, so as you go down Marbledale Road, you come to the bottom, then you have to go back up again Midland, and then Midland meanders as well. So is the water maybe migrating down Main Street and going down into the Bronx River at Main and Yonkers Avenue as opposed to traveling straight south down into Bronxville?
That's a possibility. I mean, bedrock groundwater takes a lot of twists and turns, and in fact, groundwater can go uphill if you have artesian conditions. I think people understand that if there's a lot of pressure there, it'll go up. It'll go up.
And as far as water sampling as well, was there any, or will there be any water sampling of the quarry located on Fisher Avenue, which is in the same vein, that is now filled with water as a pond, and would assumably be that water that is now leaching south down into the rest of the quarry at some point or another as that fills with rainwater?
I think that's definitely something we'll look into as a part of the P site investigation.
One other thought was, as far as if this developer decides to walk away from the project altogether, where does it take us from here as far as him being a participant, and now he decides to walk away from the project, he's no longer a participant? Is the brownfield still going to go on from the state, taking care of it on a brownfield side as a Superfund cleanup?
You're correct. If the developer ended up walking away from the agreement or defaulting on the agreement, the state would pick it up as a state Superfund site because it was deemed a significant threat.
Okay. And then in that location, he's developing two different portions of the property. So within those areas where he is going to, for argument's sake, excavate or put pylons, where his work is going to be concentrated more so than the remainder of it is going to be mostly a parking lot and encapsulating what is there. Those areas should be more concentrated, as well as where it may be excavated from that location to the road for water line, sewer line, gas line, and the such. So I think those areas should be more concentrated as far as investigation, because those will be excavated to an extent, whereas a majority of the land is going to be encapsulated by a parking lot.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So when they run utilities into the facility or wherever they need to go, they will have to trench through landfill waste. During that trenching, if they encounter regrading, if they encounter any grossly contaminated fill, it has to be characterized. And if it is indeed above the standard, it has to be pulled off the site. And they wouldn't put anything back that wouldn't have like structural integrity, such as like a car or something like that they found.
My name's Anthony Laurie. I've been in this town all my life, born in this town also. I wonder how many people in this room remember that hole being open. I could tell you myself, I worked for a contractor in the 60s, 65, 66, 67, and we were cleaning out schools. And there's many, many loads that I brought over there with asbestos and dumped it in there. Plenty of it. And that went on for good 3 years. The contractor's long gone, dead. His business is gone. And I could tell you we dumped many loads of that stuff in there, plaster, everything in there, oil drums, everything. Then in 68, I went to work in Burroughs Welcome. And all defected imprint bottles, eye drop bottles, we would load them in barrels. And there was a man we used to joke, call him Ash Can Al. We used to load him on the truck, and he used to bring them over there and dump them down there. And it's not down in the way in the bottom. It's in the middle. It's towards the top. For 3 years that I worked driving a truck as a young fella, stuff was dumped in there. Plenty of waste oil also. So there's a lot of stuff in there. So I just look around this room. I don't see too many people that I remember when I was growing up. But if you saw that hole opened up and the smell that used to come out there, especially in a damp day, and the water that was pumped out right into the street and into the sewers, and you had 4 municipalities dumping in there at one time. You had Tuckahoe, Eastchester, Bronxville, and you had Pelham coming in there dumping. So there's a lot of waste in there. So I really hope you gentlemen that are doing this know what you're doing and know what you're looking for. There's a lot of stuff down there that shouldn't be down there.
Yeah, I think we agree that there is a lot of waste on site and in these pits. To the asbestos point, we wouldn't recommend digging up asbestos if it's been buried. It's friable, and you wouldn't want it generated in the air. So, but you're right. We did find evidence of petroleum constituents. We did find PAHs, which would be associated with pharmaceuticals. So we saw all those in the chemical analysis.
Could you repeat the time frames when you were hauling to it? Between 65 and 67. And how far below its current grade do you think the hole was when you were dumping?
After that time, and then over the years it just got filled up. And then they were closing it at both ends.
My name is Edward Stowe, and this is my wife Shirley, and we are owners of 4 Marble Place, Tuckahoe. Now, we both grew up here in Tuckahoe, and we've been before the planning board, and right now, it's my opinion, it's my opinion that the DEC acts in the role of like the trustee of the environment. And our concern here is for the quality of life, not only for the present, but for future generations here in Tuckahoe. Now, back in September, we challenged the appropriateness of the planning board issuing a CND, and they ignored it. Now, at this time, here we are talking about things that may be in there, may not be in there, but the idea is that the environmental impact study was never done, and that was wrong. We said it then. As I said, it was ignored by the planning board. So my question now is, how does your remedial plan stack up against what would have been a EIS, a full EIS?
The two processes are actually completely separate. So the EIS is a part of a seeker process that the town has, or not, excuse me, not the town, the village has a part of. The DEC would not conduct an EIS, and the EIS doesn't show any, wouldn't, may refer to reports, but it doesn't do any physical testing or remediation of a site. That's there, so the two are completely separate.
No, but the CND was issued inappropriately because they said that there's no negative condition there. There is no negative condition when in fact there was never any study conducted, and that was wrong. So now here that's been that's been taken care of, but the DEC is now doing a remedial plan based on what?
It's based on a remedial investigation that showed data about what was found in the site.
And my question again is, since a full EIS would have shown something, but it was never done, and that was done inappropriately.
The EIS wouldn't have done any sampling. It would have referred probably to reports, but it's
the total picture, as I said, the quality of life, and certainly the vapors and everything else, and the toxic that affects the life of the people in the community.
That's being addressed by the remedial program through the brownfields program, not the seeker process.
What I'm saying is you would have never been involved if the planning board had did their job.
I wouldn't say that. We're not going to comment on what the planning board did or didn't decide. The EIS goes well beyond what we do because it looks at the development, the specific development as a hotel, which we're not here to talk about. We're talking about the remedy for the site in general. And the EIS evaluates things like traffic and impact to local schools and resources and runoff. It can look at contamination, and we've taken a much harder look at contamination in our process, and we are focused specifically on that contamination and not dealing with a lot of the issues that the EIS and the village board would be responsible for.
Would have done. You can't answer because you know it's not answered.
Yeah, they're two completely different documents, and the EIS.
Two different documents, but the point is, if it was done appropriately, if the CND was issued appropriately, you wouldn't even be involved here at this time because an investigation would have been required. That's the law.
We can't comment on secret. We don't do secret.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so you're not answering my question. My question is, again, how does your remedial plan stack up against what would have happened? Because you can't answer it.
You don't know.
Okay, but yet and still, as I said, you are supposed to be the people who look out for the people in the environment. That's your job. That's the job. That's the state law. And this is what our concern is now. It's not happening. It is not happening. You cover it any way you want, but it's not happening.
This man is next. Sorry.
Hi, my name is George Klein. I'm from the Sierra Club, and I live in Ossining. And I certainly, we share the concerns of Mr. Hughes, Mr. Gordon, and the nameless hydrogeologist, and the gentleman who just spoke, and many others. We do thank you for coming down and for doing your job, and it's a tough job. I only have a simple question, or maybe not so simple a question. If the remediation plan goes as currently envisaged, this is pre-comments that are still coming in, but as currently envisaged, roughly how long?
To enact the remedy?
Yeah.
Several months.
Just several months?
That's correct.
I think they're going up front, and then I'll come back.
Hi, thank you. I'm Patrick Hughes from Bronxville. I'm a planner by training and practice. I'm going to make a comment. This is a venue for making comments. And I want to return back to what Mr. Gordon said, which is that process in planning and in all decision making is very important. And it seems to me tonight that we are stuck on, we're digging our heels in, going back and forth on various technical definitions and various decisions on types of chemicals and these scientific questions, when in fact I think that we are not entirely informed and confident of your description of the process and of the distinction between the brownfield cleanup program on the one hand and the Superfund program on the other hand. And I think it's very important to say that the brownfield cleanup program was developed, if I am not incorrect, partially as an economic development tool. It is a program designed to get parcels, to get projects moving. It is parcel specific, it is project specific. And that is a good tool for the state to have, but the public here and we are, I think we're asking in several different ways over and over again to take your hat off thinking about what program you might be within in your department, and to think about more broadly what it is that we are looking for, which is a confidence that not the site, but the area, which is the multiple tax parcels, are ultimately safe and clean and meet public health definitions. So it's very important that I think that you inform us as to what the brownfield cleanup program is and is not, that it has an economic development goal. It's one of the reasons it was cooked up, and that is different from what the Superfund plan program can and can't do, and that those are in conflict, potentially in conflict, and that your jobs and what you do on a daily basis as civil servants, for which we thank you for, because God knows New York State has got it better than a lot of other states, but that there is potential conflict between moving forward, this train that's going down the tracks. We got to fulfill the BCP. We got to do the thing that's parcel specific. There's a developer. He wants to invest. All those important questions are potentially in conflict with the larger question, which is, does the overall site of the entire formal quarry, marble quarry, have an issue, have public health issues? And we really are asking, I think, that those questions be more broadly asked, and that we get unstuck from this perpetually going back to, well, the BCP says we got to do this, and so we got to do this. So that's my comment. I may be incorrect in some ways, but I think that it's important that we get right on what these processes are, what are allowed, what you have discretion to do as public decision makers, and then what the law does and doesn't allow. So I hope that that's a helpful hint to think more broadly about what we are, all of us, talking about, which is a site which ultimately and in perpetuity is clean. Thank you.
Just one comment on that. The criteria for selecting remedies in the brownfield program are the same as they are for selecting remedies in the Superfund program. So yes, the brownfield program has a redevelopment component, essentially the tax credits, which provide incentives for developers to take on contaminated properties. However, the environmental standards are nearly identical for a brownfield site versus Superfund sites.
Can I try to address some of this as well what you've brought up and what other people have brought up in terms of the potential impacts to the community by the contaminants that are in this quarry. We, myself, Renata, and everybody in the Department of Health, we're tasked with making sure that people are not being exposed to these contaminants, whether it be in a brownfield site, a Superfund site. We have to kind of work within the criteria that the DEC has established, but we're looking at exposures. We're looking at the contaminants, we're looking at where they are, we're looking at whether they're getting into situations where people can become exposed. That's what we do, sometimes to the frustration of the DEC, because we're looking at things a little bit differently than them. We're looking at, we want a negative determination of whether people are being exposed. We want the data to show that people are not being exposed. And I understand where you guys are coming back from in terms of, well, we don't know exactly what's down there. That may be the case at this point in time, but we know it's down there. It's not up here. It's not getting into situations where people can become exposed. So that's, I mean, from our perspective, we're here to look out for everybody who lives in this community. And we take this job very seriously, and it's very frustrating sometimes because there's a lot of limitations in terms of what can be done, but we make sure that if there's exposures, we're going to do everything we can to find out. If there's data that we need, we ask for it, and we ask for it, and we ask for it. So again, I understand your frustrations. It's very frustrating to all of us who have to work in this field. But I'm assuring you that we take it very seriously. And there's people in the Department of Health, the Center for Environmental Health, that are very dedicated to making sure that we're not letting exposures happen that shouldn't be happening. Okay?
I just want to first thank the government workers that are here today, and Joe Marinello, thanks so much for all your efforts over the years. In following up on what you were just saying, I actually have a real simple question. I'm concerned about the most basic level of protecting citizens of this area. What are there? I have to confess, like I don't even know. Like I live in this area my whole life, but I didn't go down Marbledale Road and exactly look at these specific lots. But are they at the most basic level of protecting our citizens? Or is there protections in place right now to make sure that the people that don't even know about what's going on? There's so many people in this town that have no idea what the heck's going on, despite the fact that it's in the news. And I was wondering, what steps are being taken to make sure that people don't unwittingly, show up on the grounds and start playing and be exposed to the vapors, the soil vapors, the other vapors, et cetera.
The site is actually fenced right now, the brownfield site. However, off-site, where the other quarries are, most of those areas are paved or formerly parking lots. And there's also a layer of fill material on top of that, which would prevent exposure to groundwater and soils. Other than that, the vapor component we're taking a look at right now through our off-site investigation.
Hi, my name's Gretchen Pingle, and I live in Bronxville. I'm still concerned about the migration of the groundwater, and you mentioned that although there don't seem to be big conduits, you did mention that there's some migration, and I know that silt moves with water, and this is years and years and years, so I'm quite certain that some contaminated soil is moving with water in places. So the whole filtration thing, I don't really have much confidence in. I want to know the path of the groundwater. I want to know that, and I bet you all can figure that out, right? So are you going to do that? Because our school is built on, in Bronxville, is built on wetlands and a former pond, and this whole FEMA flood mitigation project is happening for sure, and it's imminent, and they're going to be doing a ton of excavating there, and I'm concerned about the workers on the property. I'm concerned about what could be unleashed into the air of where our children, go to school and walk by. So the path of the groundwater, I'd like to see that worked out.
When is the Corps going to do that job? Is there a time frame?
It was supposed to have been done. I think it could be within weeks. It's really simple.
And it's in 2 phases.
Any idea who would know? Are they coordinating with someone?
Yeah, Jim Palmer. Jim Palmer.
Village administrator.
Yeah, and Mary Marvin, certainly, the trustees, yeah.
I think we have a general idea of where groundwater is going, and we've brought that up throughout the meeting. And there's been some offsite wells, as I mentioned. We know bedrock groundwater in general is flowing towards the Bronx River. That probably doesn't answer your question in much detail. Well, I can also say that the Army Corps project probably is also subject to a stormwater pollution prevention plan. Well, any stormwater. So if there's water, correct, the water table comes up, and during the project, if the area is flooded, they have to prevent that water from being discharged or anybody making contact with it. If it pools, if it ponds, and they have to get rid of it to do the excavation, they also have to treat that to get rid of it.
I said I'd go to you. I'll get over here.
Hi, I'd like to address Mr. Kapinski's comment about exposure. My husband and I, we have Key Martial Arts, which is in the site. And right now, when I went and looked at the construction management plan, there is a heavy amount of digging that's going to be occurring within 1 or 2 feet from the windows, all to, actually it's for the stormwater containment. It looks that it's a minimum of 10 feet down, if not lower. So for those of us who are bounded by the site, right next to the site, you have all the homes up on the ridge, you have all the buildings around, then you have quite a lot of residential within 2 or 3 blocks. What sort of protections are you guys just going to start digging, and then if an alarm goes off, oh my gosh, we have to shut our windows? I mean, what is going to happen to protect us if we don't know what is in the site?
Well, we'll have 2 layers of protection. When remedial activities start, invasive activities start on site, there is a site health and safety plan, and that is covering activities of the actual workers on site. Now, in addition to that, we are going to have a community air monitoring plan, which you and your husband have been familiar with during the remedial investigation. We had a community air monitoring plan that was up and running, which monitors any dusts or VOCs that may potentially be airborne and leave the site. Because the building that you're currently locating in is bounding the site, we will make sure that there's air monitoring there are adequate air monitoring stations in the camp to make sure there's upwind coverage, downwind, and also nearest to the nearest occupied structures. So I understand your concerns, and we'll do everything we can with the community air monitoring plan, including adding additional monitors if we need to during remedial intrusive activities on the site. I understand your concerns.
Well, when we had actually spoken, I don't know, 8 months ago, you had mentioned that there would be alarms or data. It was never shared with anybody in the community if anything had gone off, none of the data. And I was told, I don't remember if it was a conversation with you, Randy, or an email with you, Renata, that, oh, we don't get that data for 2 or 3 weeks later. I mean, if we have our windows right there, or the neighbors have their windows, we're not waiting 2 or 3 weeks. And then, oh my gosh, if an alarm goes off. I mean,
No,
are you putting protections for all of the community, anybody who's even 2 blocks or 3 blocks away? Oh, we're going to be doing this type of digging, shut your windows on this day, or put some sort of protective film. Are you going to be informing us before and during, not 2 weeks after an alarm went off?
Well, I understand your concern about the monitoring ports, and I can say that Randy and I did get camp monitoring data on a daily or a weekly basis from the consultant's environmental person, their health and safety person. Typically, if there is an action level that is exceeded in the air, an alarm goes off on the site. Usually, the way these intrusive activities are conducted, it's under the health and safety plan first, because there's workers closer to the actual excavation, and if they exceed their level, an alarm goes off and they stop their excavation and they address their issue. We typically do not provide the community or other interested parties with camp monitoring data on a daily or weekly basis. I can say for sure that Randy and I did review every day. Also, if there are exceedances done, we are notified right away up in Albany.
Yeah, but do you notify, I mean, you're just saying your construction workers will stop. Okay, something's happened.
Correct. The health
Construction
and
workers
safety
are-
of, yes.
Nobody comes to us and say, oh my gosh, you have all these children in here, shut your windows. Or even when you stop for, I don't know, an hour, 2 hours, you let it all clear up, you start again, it might go off again. How much exposure, because this is what supposedly you're protecting us from,
Correct.
how much exposure and how much are you helping us to prevent being exposed other than, oh my gosh, an alarm went off, our construction workers stopped, they're going to start, an alarm goes off again. There should be some protocols in place.
Believe me, I just said a few words about what our job is to prevent exposure. And your situation is somewhat unique. You are very close to this
Well,
project.
not just us, there's all the homes around too,
Yes.
and there's several other industries. It's
Absolutely.
not just
and
us.
this is this goes on all over the state, these types of projects. And people are in close proximity to these projects. There's methodologies that have become successful in terms of minimizing the release of these contaminants as the work is being done. But with that being said, again, we're going to have to establish a protocol to make sure that your concerns are addressed. Whether you're asking for them or not, that's something that we would do because of the potential exposures that you and your students would experience. And that's what I'm trying to say. We're not going through every single detail right now in terms of what we're going to do, but Renata, as the project manager in the Department of Health, is going to make sure that we do everything that's necessary to ensure that if there is a release, it's stopped right away and appropriate actions are taken to ensure that you and your students are not exposed, or residents or any other people who occupy buildings in the area.
Well, I want to thank you for proposing that, but you can understand my trepidation. Well, let me finish, because it was us, actually, who had to request for our building, which is in the site, to even be tested. Nobody came forward to us. We had to be asking, we had to actually hire professionals to advocate for us. In addition, even the heavy metal testing that was done in the groundwater, it was Mr. Hughes, an independent expert, who noticed that it had been left out. So our trepidation and our actual fear comes because we do not have confidence in what has come about so far. We feel that there's a lot of holes, and a lot of the community is sitting right here on the edge to exposure.
I understand. You were a little bit ahead of us in terms of what would have been done. Your building would have been sampled as part of the program that we're in. And again, as part of our job to make sure that we explore all potential exposure pathways. Your building would have been sampled.
Well, thank you
whether
for that, but
asked
we're
for it or
already
not.
into the RAWP, and
There
it was
was
the end
no-
of the
there's no
RIR
work-
to get
But
it.
there's no work that's been done yet. Before the work is done, we will make sure that the procedures are in place to make sure that the exposures don't
But
occur.
Mr. Heitzman even said that to properly sample buildings, it should have been done in the dead of winter, and we had to we were asking from November, and that didn't even happen until March. So our trepidation kind of, I guess I don't want to get it so specific, but I guess the reason I'm pointing to the specifics is because we are all sitting here and not quite convinced that everything is being done for the entire community's safety. So that was the point out. Thank you for protocols. I appreciate that.
And I believe me, I do understand your concerns. Probably if I was sitting in your seat and I didn't do the job I'm doing, I would be exactly on board with what you're saying. But again, our experience and our work over the years in terms of dealing with situations like this has allowed us to know where and what we have to look at. And again, we don't want to let any stone be unturned.
Well, for
and having
community-
your concern and having you bring, your concerns to us, you were justified, you were rightful, and again, we would have been doing that anyway before, things got to the point where there would be a potential
Well,
for
that's thank you. And also, any protocols that you're putting forth toward the community, we would really appreciate if you could also get them onto the Tuckahoe website, because there seems to be a complete kind of lack of where information and how information is coming together. So thank you.
That is a problem, but I think we're all, the state is working on trying to make those things available.
Hi, I'm James Reed. This might be a moot point, but if Tuckahoe and Westchester, New York State, whoever was aware of all that dumping back in the 60s and were allowing it, then going after the companies that did it in 50s, 60s, then if that was permitted by officials, then going after those companies seems to be a moot point. They weren't breaking the law then. Maybe, like I said, I don't know. And the other thing is, if the developer, I think you said, if the developer decides we don't want to do it anymore, you guys are still going forth. Is that right? With looking into this, and thank you.
Yes, that's correct. We'd be moving forward with Superfund if the developer drops out. And to your other point, it's kind of a difficult thing when we're talking about dumping and stuff that happened in the 70s and the 60s. That's before a lot of Department of Environmental Conservation programs were even in place or the law. So it's a difficult thing to an EPA. So what George just said, just.
George, and my good friend here, did I misunderstand you? And Randy, did I misunderstand you? You did not give an authority or the okay for a hotel to be built on that site?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm so happy I heard that because I thought I was dreaming again. But here's my question, Randy and George. As I told you, I've been here all my life. I watched a lot of developers come into this village, and they promise you the sky. But when they get in front of our zoning board and our planning boards, they require outside experts like environmental people, traffic studies, and etc. My question to you, George and Randy, in all the years you have been working in the DEC department, just name me one project that you know of one of the developers, people, who came in with a negative report. You know what? You're looking at me because I know you're both very honest. And that's why I'm so happy you came to the village. You didn't say never, because that's the word, never. The developers people never, ever, ever come back with a negative report. Everything is fine. Traffic is flowing. Everything is just grand dandy. What a joke. Just a joke. It's a joke that upsets me to no end to watch these developers come into this village, do what they got to do, and run back home to Bedford or Chappaqua to sleep. They don't sleep in this little village like I do above this site. Thank you very much. That's the last thing I'm going to say. And the other thing I want to say is, as you know, I'm alone now in a 4-bedroom home, and I'm more than happy. If you people need a place to sleep tonight, you're welcome to come to my house.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We might take you up on that. It's getting kind of late.
Yeah, really.
Hi, my name is Steve Hess, and my son goes to Key Martial Arts. And do I understand correctly, there's so much unknown here, and we're talking about drums, and if there's digging and piercing, that if the developer didn't go ahead, that you would do the same exact remediation as if the developer, I mean, you would dig to the level and potentially pierce and uncover and disturb this material the same way as if a developer is developing that property?
I think in the case that if a developer fell out of the BCP program, the state Superfund would enact a remedy such as a cap and cover over the site.
Right, cap it and encapsulate it.
But it needs to be graded before it can be capped and covered as well. So in a similar fashion, we would have to grade the site in order for it to accept the cap or the cover. Depends on what the type of what the cap is. If it's concrete or if it's asphalt, you know.
Yeah, I can't imagine it's anywhere near the same.
Well, the cap actually is less than what the load-bearing capacity of building foundation is. So the building
Well,
foundation itself.
if you're driving piles,
Yeah, the
yeah,
developer has the
I'm only just bringing up the point that everybody, as you said, the train is on the track. But if you let the genie out of the bottle, and which everybody seems to be very concerned about, once the genie's out of the bottle, you can't get it back in the bottle. So is it better net overall to leave it capped or to cap it and leave it encapsulated versus disturbing it to a level that may be very unsafe for the immediate surroundings and beyond?
I think what we're saying here is, the removal of these hotspot areas is it's very consistent with projects of similar fashion across the state. So the remedy that we would enact, and that you asked that question through Superfund, would be very similar to what the developer has proposed.
Okay, but what I'm saying is what's necessary to disturb and potentially expose the environment, whether we're talking about VOC, particulate, in solution, various methods of this leaching into the environment when it's disturbed. There's not a safer way to. There's some terrible things that I'm understanding that we're put in here, and maybe many unknowns. Why? I mean, just from my experience, why would that be unnecessarily disturbed rather than, hey, let's just put a cap on this and disturb it the least amount possible?
I think it's a feasibility question as well. I was just talking about grading the site or capping it. However, in the BCP program, we're having the developer is proposing a remedy, and that's what's been selected because of the development. So in the Superfund program, we would cap that site in hopes that it would be used as a commercial property in the future, and there would be measures, say SSDS installation, subslab depressurization, the radon systems, if a new parcel was to be, or a new building was to be built on the structure.
But is it really necessary to be developed on rather than consider it a hotspot and try to leave it alone? That's what the net of what I'm trying to.
Yeah, I appreciate where you're coming from. Yeah. I think we're saying it's worth going after that superficial contamination
and potentially exposing and piercing things that nobody here seems to be able to quantify what's in there. So the unknown with the known is the unknown is better than the known. And is that what's being stated? The devil you know versus the devil you don't?
Well, there's several issues with the site that we'd like to address with the remedy. I think that's what we're aiming at. We do know that there are issues here, and they're not being addressed by leaving it alone and doing nothing.
Understood.
So we want to make sure that we're addressing these issues with the remedy.
Right, but
so that's what I'm saying. It's better to do
it. Remedy, the risk reward is the remedy potentially, as I say, going to let a genie out of a bottle, and the lag time in between, as Rachel pointed out, is then by the time people are notified, and once it's in the environment. I mean, I have some very close people that are still alive and have passed that were first responders down at the World Trade Center. Okay, so there was a lot of monitoring going on down there.
Yeah, again, we believe excavations can be done safely at the site as long as the protocols are followed. The state has a hierarchy when it comes to remedial technologies. Source removal is one of those. Containment is a lesser hierarchy, especially when you talk about what's called source materials that can feasibly be excavated, that could be contributing to contamination in other media, such as groundwater. And in fact, the law requires sources to be removed, and that's what this remedy reflects, is the law's preference to remove identifiable sources of contamination to other media where it's feasible to do so. and then capping and managing in place what cannot feasibly
I
be
mean,
removed.
I mean, just again, is it the risk reward? Is it? I understand. We certainly don't want it. That's the point of the whole thing. Is we don't want it leaching into the environment. Are we? You know, how is that? How is that assessed?
Yeah, again, it is a judgment call, and because we believe the excavation can be done safely and preventing exposures to people around, that it's worth doing.
But by what method? I mean, if you've got a backhoe in there, and I mean, how do you know?
I mean, they water it down to prevent dusts. If necessary, we put filters on building air intakes. You know, we've done things like that before. Yeah.
The volatiles are being exposed, and the the petroleum potentially. There were drums discussed before.
We dig up
that
oil.
leaches in and is exposed to the environment at that.
We dig up petroleum sites and coal tar sites all the time, and we manage exposures. You know, we do it next to hospitals. We do it next to schools. We've done this for many years.
I understand that, but again, the risk of disturbance versus leaving it as intact as possible. That's the real question.
I hear you. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi. From what I understand right now, we are in a comment period where the public here and also by mail and email get a chance to tell you what their concerns are. And obviously a lot of concerns have been expressed tonight. And people are asking that you do more testing across the entire site, and that you test the water, and that other testing happens by virtue of this comment period. I'm hearing from you that that what is going to be done is pretty much set in stone at this point, and I'm not hearing a lot of flexibility on hearing what's being said. So my question is, what would it take in the comment period? What would you need to hear or see that would change that opinion and change your perspective so that the one site that the Marriott is on does not just get capped, and so that testing happens across the entire site first? So again, to restate it, what would change your mind from where you are right now during this comment period so that people know what they're aiming for to get what they're asking for?
Shorter answer to your question would be to get testing across the whole entire site and not move forward with the remediation would be for the developer to drop out of the BCP.
So I hate to say that, but you know, I haven't been home for dinner yet, and it's 10 o'clock at night, and I've been here listening to all of this, and it's all for naught, because there's nothing that anybody's going to say between now and the 24th, or write or do, that's going to change anything unless Marriott drops out. Is that the accurate?
No, what any comments should focus on is whether the remedy that's proposed is not protective. Those are really the criteria that you need to make a case for, that there is somehow new information or other information besides what's been collected in the remedial investigation that indicates that the remedy that's been proposed is not protective of public health.
But I think the whole point of everybody here is that you can't know what you haven't looked for, right? So you're in a catch-22. You're saying unless you have new evidence, you're not going to change what you're doing, so the comment period is irrelevant, but there can't be any new evidence because you're not looking for it.
Oh, that was your question? Oh, did you have questions for me? No. All right, so, excuse me. All right, so I'm going over here. Yes, oh, over here? All right.
You know, I think the community is really frustrated that it has a landfill in the first place, and that's understandable. But the landfill is not going to go away. Whether it's Superfund, Brownfield, it's there, okay? The landfill is there, and I think what DEC is trying to tell you tonight is that regardless of what's in it, it could be asbestos, PCB, whatever's in it, the remedy for landfills is essentially the same. We don't dig up landfills. It's too dangerous to dig up landfills. It is better to keep them in place and properly cover them. Now, the truth is that the brownfield program is, by having a private developer remediate a site as opposed to the state, is that when the state does the Superfund program, it is scrutinized. You know, the funding for it is heavily scrutinized. And if there's a cheaper way to accomplish a goal, that is the way it'll be done. In other words, this project, this part of the landfill is going to be covered with hardscape materials. So rainwater will not get into it from this point on, which is happening now. Okay, so the development is good for this half of the landfill. Okay, half of this landfill is going to be properly capped in perpetuity. The environmental easement that will be put on this site is not just for the current owner to comply with, it's for all future owners forever that ever own this site. Okay, so the cap system must be maintained in perpetuity. That's what it says. That is important for you to understand because you almost want another developer on the rest of this, because the remedy that will be done under Superfund will probably be a soil cap and not a concrete cap. I mean, because it is your state taxpayer dollars that pays for 100% of it. And if a soil cap is just as protective as a concrete cap, you will not get concrete. All right, this is a better cap that's being done through a private sector developer.
I gotta object.
Well, you could, but that is the reality.
It's premature to speculate on what a Superfund remedy might be, and the idea that we would take the low-cost option and suggest that it's inferior, I think, is unfair.
Well, maybe, but this is a good. In other words, this is a good remedy you're getting. This isn't a lousy remedy. You're suggesting that because every inch of the landfill wasn't investigated, that makes a difference. It really doesn't make a difference, okay? And this was a good investigation. This investigation had many, many borings put into it, and the one gentleman suggested not every inch of the bottom was investigated. It doesn't have to be. No investigation investigates every inch of the bottom of the hole. A lot of borings were done from 20 to 40 feet. That's deep. That is not shallow. A very good investigation was done. The point of the investigation is not to find every single drum and every single piece of asbestos or whatever was put in there. It is to overall find out if there are exceedances in that whole landfill area and whether it's leaving the site. This investigation did that. It met all the state protocols for the types of things that get investigated on every site. We investigated every single suite of the type of contaminants that exist, and the remedy, regardless of what's in it, is generally the same. But in this instance, it's a good remedy. It's a hardscape cap that may or may not be done by the Superfund program. Okay, I will correct that. But it is as good as it gets in terms of capping a landfill. Most landfills are capped. You could tell me if I'm wrong, with a geomembrane and soil on top, not with hardscape. Okay, and I am the environmental lawyer for the project.
Yeah, and I want to just say, George and Randy, what I said before came to be true. This environmental attorney was hired by the developer. On her first presentation she made to this village, which is on tape, she got up and said, that's a municipal dump, not an industrial dump. I wanted to puke home, but I couldn't leave my wife to come down and challenge her like I'm doing now. I'm telling you, every person hired by a developer never comes in with a negative report. They're not concerned about the children in this village. They're not concerned about me and everybody else in this village. They're concerned about a hotel.
Can I respond to Mr. Marinelli? Mr. Marinelli, Listen, I have nothing but respect and admiration for you, but I had to take umbrage with some of the things you said, and this is why I take umbrage with it. With the exception of metals in groundwater that Randy's group sampled, okay? He sampled 6 or 8 wells. All that negative information you saw up on the screen, the PCBs, the soil vapor, all that stuff, every single piece of negativity you saw on that screen with all the exceedances, my group found. That's all our data. We found all those flaws with this site. So for you to say that I'm hiding something or that I'm a puppet of the developer, it's not true. It's just not true. We split samples with the DEC when we took when they did the groundwater samples. Our data indicated the same exact thing that the DEC's indicated.
Yeah, more due respect. I had to fight to get this lot into the brownfield program. They didn't want to take it. I fought for it. I thought it should be cleaned up because of residents, because of business people, and all I have here are some paid lawyers, some paid hydrologists, some paid geologists, some people who live in Fleetwood who have no relation, who don't own property in Tuckahoe, who can I finish?
No, you're
because
the man to deal with the politicians.
You didn't introduce me to your boyfriend, Mabel. And
Fitzpatrick made the deal with you.
I didn't meet you.
I don't want it. Fitzpatrick
Right.
made the deal with you.
Right. So you're Mabel's boyfriend, Mr. Stern?
No, you made the
And Mabel's not a politician? Okay. Melba, sorry. Right. Melba didn't want to be on the council, and that's why you're not here? Okay. So let's deal with realities. You know, I have someone who's a tenant who seems to have left. Rachel, you're gone. And an attorney who represents her, and the hydrogeologist who came up with stuff that was from outer space. So basically, I didn't create this landfill. Yeah, my dad had a business here. He may have dumped there, but I'm cleaning it up. Especially for you, Mr. Stern. You're a resident of Tuckahoe, right? Okay, but he's not. Just wanted to... Yeah. In your house. Your house. Your house. Your house.
Okay, folks, 10 o'clock. My team has to get back to Albany tonight. We are driving home. The comment period will end April 24th. Please be sure, if you want your comments in the record, to submit them by email or mail. Thank you for coming out tonight. We see your passion, we see your interest, and good night.
Yes, you're welcome.